At this late hour, the boundary between our world and another becomes most fragile. The insomniacs, the night shift workers, or simply the lonely souls seeking a voice for companionship all are listening. My radio station is nestled deep within Whispering Pines Forest, about a 30-minute drive from the nearest town. It's a small log cabin converted into a studio, with mid-range broadcasting equipment capable of covering the entire valley and surrounding hills. By day, this forest is bathed in sunlight and birdsong, but as the sun sets, it transforms into a different world, dark, cold, and filled with whispers of unknown origin. I've been here for several years now, after leaving my job at a large city radio station. Back then, everyone thought I was crazy, giving up a rising career to move to a remote area and open a radio station whose only topic was ghost stories. Who would do that? But tonight, I won't tell you about my crazy decision. Instead, I'll tell you about urban legends. Stories passed from person to person, tales we're never sure are fact or fiction until we experience them ourselves. I just received an email from Lily Thompson, a 28-year-old photographer from Prague, Czech Republic. She attached a short video to her email. I'll read you the contents of that email now. Dear Morgan, I'm a frequent listener of your show, even from half a world away. I don't know if you'll read this email, but I need to share something that happened to me 2 weeks ago. I'm a freelance photographer, often shooting architecture at strange hours to capture the perfect light. That night, I was in Prague's old town, where there are 14th-century cobblestone alleys. It started to rain, a persistent drizzle that dampened everything but wasn't enough to make me stop. I'd heard the legend of the old key collector from my grandmother, who lived here her entire life. She recounted that on rainy nights, in the ancient cobblestone alleys, people would sometimes see a tarnished brass key suddenly appear in a puddle. Anyone who picked it up would hear a pained whisper, "Return it to me," and then the key would turn to ash. I always thought it was just a story to scare children. Until that evening, I was filming a personal project about light reflecting on the wet pavement when I saw something glinting under a street lamp. An antique brass key lay in the middle of a puddle. It looked beautiful, classic in design with intricate patterns, as if it belonged to some centuries-old castle. I was still recording the video I sent you, and you can see me tilting the camera down for a close-up of the key. That's when I decided to pick it up. Morgan, the moment my fingers touched the key, a chilling numbness spread from my fingertips up my arm. My heart pounded, not from excitement, but from pure fear. I heard, and I swear this is true, a whisper right next to my ear, hoarse and pained, "Return it to me." I couldn't see anyone, but I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. The key in my hand suddenly became scorching hot, and then, I don't know how to describe this properly. It disintegrated into ash in my palm. In the video, you can see the moment I screamed and dropped the camera. When I picked it up, a tall, shadowy figure briefly appeared at the end of the alley before vanishing around the corner. I don't know how I drove home. For the past 2 weeks, I haven't dared to leave my apartment after sunset. Worse, every night I dream of searching for a key in an endless castle, with footsteps following but never catching up. I've watched the video hundreds of times. Each time I watch, I see new details. In the last frame, if you zoom in and increase the brightness, you can see the face of that shadowy figure. I won't describe it, but I'm certain it's not the face of a living person. I don't know if you believe me, Morgan. Sometimes I wonder if I'm losing my mind, but the video is still there, and the ashes of the key are still in the pocket of the coat I wore that night. Lily Thompson. I watched the video Lily sent. It was only about 4 to 8 seconds long. The image was shaky, but clear enough to see the brass key lying in the puddle. As the camera tilted closer, the light reflecting off the metal surface revealed intricate carvings. Then a hand entered the frame, fingers touching the key. Immediately, the camera shook violently, Lily's terrified scream echoed, and the device fell to the ground. In a few chaotic seconds, the camera pointed towards the end of the alley. There, blurred under the streetlights and the falling rain, stood a tall, shadowy figure, its head tilted slightly to one side. The image was too quick, too blurry to discern details. But when I paused the video and zoomed in, as Lily suggested, I saw that face, and I understood why she didn't want to describe it. Urban legends are not just stories to scare children. Sometimes they are warnings passed down from generation to generation. Warnings about the dark corners of the world, where reality as we know it is bent, where nameless things can seep through. I don't know what door that key opened, or if someone or something is still searching for it. But I do know that Lily Thompson is not the only one to have witnessed this phenomenon. After receiving her email, I searched for information about the legend of the old key collector in Prague. It turns out there were at least 3 documented cases in the 20th century. All were tourists who inadvertently picked up the key in the rain. One disappeared without a trace 2 days later. The second went mad, continuously drawing the same giant wooden door until his death. The third, a historian, wrote a 400-page manuscript about the history of a castle that didn't exist in any historical records before setting himself on fire with the manuscript. If you ever find yourself in Prague, walking through the old alleys on a rainy night, be careful what you pick up. Not every treasure brings good fortune. Sometimes some things should be left alone, and some doors should remain forever locked. This is Morgan Hayes, and you're listening to Late Night Stories Radio. Stay with us. When we return, I'll tell you about the music box under the bridge, a legend from Strasbourg, France, and the man who recorded it singing. Welcome back to Late Night Stories Radio. I'm Morgan Hayes, your companion through the stories of darkness. Outside my small studio, the rain has begun to fall. The first drops drum a rhythm on the wooden roof, as if someone is tapping their fingers, asking to come in. But we know there's no one out there, don't we? Just the tall pines, the darkness, and perhaps things unnamed that never truly existed in the world of light. When we were children, our parents often warned us to stay away from dangerous places. Don't go out alone at night, don't talk to strangers, don't go down dark alleys. But they rarely warned us about old bridges. Perhaps they should have. Last week, I received a call from Michael Bennett, a photojournalist working for a small newspaper in Strasbourg, France. He listens to my show via podcast and wanted to share his experience. I recorded the call with his permission. Listen closely. Michael's voice was slightly shaky as he spoke. I don't know if you'll believe me, but I need to tell someone this. I can't tell my colleagues or friends, they'll think I'm crazy. Don't worry, Michael, I reassured him. This is where we share stories that others might not believe. Tell me what happened. Morgan, I'm a photojournalist tasked with doing a piece on the historical architecture of Strasbourg. Part of the job was to photograph the Pont du Corbeau, the Raven Bridge, an ancient stone bridge spanning the Ill River. This bridge dates back to the 14th century, and there are many legends about it. I asked, what kind of legends? Michael took a deep breath. Many locals believe it's where witches were executed in the Middle Ages. They were locked in iron cages and lowered into the river until they drowned. But there's another, lesser-known legend about a music box. Locals say that if you go under the bridge on a moonless night, you'll see a small, dark wooden music box tied to the old iron bars. They say that at night, it winds itself up and plays a strange lullaby. Then it shatters, the wooden pieces scattering like broken bones. And if you're brave enough to pick up a piece, you'll hear children crying. Of course, I didn't believe any of that. I'm a journalist. I work with facts, with what can be verified. I took pictures of the bridge during the day, but I needed some night shots to complete the collection. I asked, and you went under the bridge at night? Michael chuckled softly. Yes, a bad decision. I should have shot from the riverbank or from on top of the bridge, but I wanted a different angle, a shot no one else had. So I waited until about 2:00 a.m. when the city was asleep. I brought my camera, a flashlight, and a tripod. Initially, everything was normal. I climbed down a trail leading to the riverbank and then entered the space beneath the bridge. It was a narrow, dark area. The river water gently lapped against the stone banks. I started setting up my equipment and took a few test shots. Then I heard it. Heard what? I asked. Michael lowered his voice. A winding sound, creak, 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 very slow, very steady. As if someone was slowly winding a clock, I thought it might be a sound from the bridge itself, perhaps metal expanding or wind blowing through cracks. But it was too deliberate, too regular. I shone my flashlight around the space, and I saw it, Morgan. A small, dark wooden box tied to an old iron bar with a rotten rope. It looked very old, with intricate carvings I couldn't make out, and it was vibrating slightly. I asked, did you go closer to it? Michael said, I did, I couldn't help it. I'm a journalist, and this was a discovery, potentially a historical artifact, or maybe just someone's prank. I walked towards it, shining my flashlight directly on it. That's when I noticed the smell, a mixture of damp mud and rusty iron, and another smell I didn't recognize then. But now I think it was the smell of old bones. As I got closer, the winding sound stopped completely. Silence. I reached out to touch the box. I asked, and then what happened? Michael replied, trembling. My flashlight flickered and then went out. I tried to turn it back on, but it wouldn't work. In the darkness, the box began to vibrate more intensely, and then I heard a melody. Not from inside the box, but seemingly from the air around me. A lullaby with a distorted tune, not conforming to any scale I've ever heard. And the singing, Morgan? It was children's voices, but not just one child, many voices at once. All choked and trembling. Then the box exploded. I couldn't see, but I heard the shattering and felt pieces of wood flying towards me. One piece cut my cheek, another my hand. I panicked, fumbling with my phone to get some light. When I managed to, I saw the music box pieces scattered on the ground. They didn't look like wood, Morgan. They looked like bones. Bones carved into the shape of wooden fragments. What did you do then? I asked. I ran, Michael said. I left my tripod and camera. I just wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. But before I escaped, I heard laughter. Children's laughter, but joyful, as if they had just played a prank. I returned the next morning when the sun was up. My tripod was still there, but the camera was gone. No sign of the music box or its fragments, just a cut on my cheek and a few small cuts on my hand to prove that the night wasn't a nightmare. I asked, did you check your camera? Maybe it captured something. Michael sighed. That's the strangest thing. The camera disappeared that night, but 3 days later, I received a package with no return address. Inside was my camera, intact. When I checked the memory card, all the photos I took were gone, except for a single video I don't remember shooting. I asked, what did the video show? Michael said, just a black screen with sound. The sound of my heart beating very fast, very loudly, and underneath it, very faintly, children singing. I can send it to you if you want, but I advise you not to listen to it at night or when you're alone. That was my interview with Michael Bennett. He sent me the video, and I listened to it despite the warning. As he described, most of it was just a black screen with a heartbeat. But when I turned up the volume and filtered out the noise, I could hear the singing. Not a recognizable melody, but something older, more primal. And the voices, the choking children's voices, kept me from sleeping for 2 nights. I researched the Pont du Corbeau further and found that from the 14th to the 17th century, it was indeed a site for the execution of those accused of witchcraft. Many of them were women, but there were also children. Children believed to be defiled or bearing the mark of the devil. They were locked in iron cages and lowered into the river, where they slowly drowned or died of starvation. The bridge has been rebuilt many times over the centuries, but perhaps deep beneath the new layers of stone, the old iron bars still remain submerged in the water. And perhaps sometimes, the restless spirits who cannot find peace call out to the living, inviting them to hear their final song. If you ever visit Strasbourg and walk past the Pont du Corbeau on a quiet night, perhaps you'll hear a gentle winding sound from beneath the bridge. My advice is to keep walking and don't look back. Some songs should not be heard, and some stories should not be retold. But if you are drawn by that sound and decide to descend the old steps leading to the dark riverbank, remember that sometimes those who died long ago still want someone to listen. And young souls sometimes have very unchildlike ways of playing. This is Morgan Hayes, and you're listening to Late Night Stories Radio. Stay with us. When we return, I'll tell you about the dazzling intersection and the man who encountered a shadow in his rearview mirror. Welcome back to Late Night Stories Radio. I'm Morgan Hayes, still here in my small studio in Whispering Pines Forest, where it's so quiet I can hear the ticking of the clock and the low hum of the radio transmitter. The rain has stopped, but a thick fog has begun to rise from the damp ground, enveloping the forest in an opaque white curtain. From the studio window, I can only see a few meters before everything blurs into the misty white. Tonight is a perfect night to talk about deserted roads, thick fog, and the things we glimpse in the rearview mirror. I just received a voicemail from a man named Jack Harl, a long-haul delivery driver from Norway. He regularly drives through remote roads, over lonely mountains and valleys, where you can drive for hours without seeing a soul. This is his story. Hello, Morgan. I hope this message reaches you. I happened to catch your show on the radio in my cabin while driving through central Norway last week. I'm not one to believe in the supernatural, but something happened to me 3 months ago that I still can't explain. I'm a delivery driver for a large shipping company, running the route from Oslo to Trondheim. Most of the journey is on the E6 highway, one of Norway's main roads, but there are also sections that pass through remote countryside and lonely mountains. That night, I started from Oslo around 10:00 p.m. The weather wasn't good, light rain and thick fog, but I'm used to it after 15 years in the business. I had an urgent shipment to deliver the next morning, so I couldn't wait for better weather. Everything was normal for the first few hours. The radio played old songs. I drank coffee from my thermos, and the truck drove steadily on the empty road. Around 2:00 a.m., I reached an area called Dovrefjell, a mountain range in central Norway. The road was deserted, no other cars. The fog was so thick I could only see about 15 meters ahead. As I drove around a bend, I realized I had come to an intersection. The strange thing was, I didn't remember any intersection on this stretch of road, even though I'd driven here hundreds of times. There were no signs, no streetlights, just 3 roads merging in the fog. I was sure I needed to turn right to stay on the E6, so I did. As soon as I made the turn, I noticed the temperature in the cabin suddenly dropped. I could see my breath in the air. The AC was still off, and I checked the thermometer. Outside, it was dead sea, cold but not unusual for the mountains late at night. Then I saw headlights in my rearview mirror, a blinding white light behind the truck. I thought it was another vehicle, perhaps another truck going in the same direction. But the light didn't move closer or farther. It maintained a fixed distance whether I sped up or slowed down. I watched it in the mirror for about 10 minutes, then decided to pull over to see what it was. Maybe a car with faulty headlights or someone needing help. I stopped the truck, turned off the engine, and waited. The vehicle behind me also stopped. The headlights remained blinding. I couldn't see the type of car or the license plate because the light was too intense. I decided to get out and check. As soon as I opened the cabin door, a blast of cold wind swept in, so cold it felt like it cut through me, not a natural kind of cold. It was like, I don't know how to describe it, Morgan, but it was like the kind of cold that chills you to the bone, to your soul. In the rearview mirror, I saw a shadow standing in the headlights, a tall, thin figure, hooded and wearing a long black raincoat. I couldn't see a face, just a dark shape standing completely motionless in the middle of the road. "Hello," I called out. "Do you need help?" No answer, just the sound of the wind whistling through the mountains. I started to feel something was wrong. My neck hairs stood up, and I had the feeling I was being watched from all directions, not just from behind. I decided to get back into the cabin. As soon as I closed the door, I looked in the rearview mirror again. The shadow had moved closer. Now it stood right behind my truck, perhaps just a few meters away. I still couldn't see a face under the hood, but I could clearly see its hands, grayish-green, thin, with unusually long fingers. I panicked, started the truck immediately, and sped off. In the mirror, I saw the shadow still standing there, motionless, the headlights off and darkness swallowing everything. I drove for about 5 minutes in a state of panic, my heart pounding, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. Then I realized I was on an unfamiliar road. This wasn't the E6. The road was narrower, winding, and seemed to lead deeper into the mountains instead of through them. As I tried to figure out where I was, the headlights reappeared in the rearview mirror. This time they were closer, faster. I pressed the accelerator to the floor, but my heavy truck couldn't gain speed quickly on the winding road. The headlights got closer and closer, so close that the entire cabin was engulfed in blinding white light. I couldn't see anything in the mirror but that light. Then I noticed something. There was no engine sound from the vehicle behind me. No noise at all, except my truck's engine and the wind. I came to a bend, and as I turned, the headlights vanished, completely disappeared. I looked around in confusion and realized I was back on the E6, heading in the right direction towards Trondheim, as if I had never turned onto the strange road. I pulled over to the side, trying to comprehend what had just happened. I checked my GPS. It showed I had been on the E6 the entire time, never making any turn. I checked my watch. Only 5 minutes had passed since I saw the intersection. 5 minutes for a journey that seemed to last at least 15 minutes. Morgan, I've driven that road hundreds of times. There's no intersection there. There's no other road there. I checked maps, asked other drivers. No one knew about that intersection. I still drive that route, but now I always go before sunset, and I always feel tense when I pass through that Dovrefjell area. I always feel like someone is watching from the shadows, waiting for me to take the wrong turn at the intersection that doesn't exist. That was Jack Harl's story. After receiving this voicemail, I researched the Dovrefjell area in Norway. It's an ancient mountain range where many Norwegian folk legends originated. Locals believe it's home to Norse mythological spirits and trolls. Interestingly, I found several similar reports from other drivers who passed through this area at night. They described a strange intersection appearing in the fog, a road not on any map, and a feeling of being watched. Some even described a tall, thin figure in a black raincoat. There's one more detail I didn't tell Jack. In Norwegian mythology, there's a creature called Pesta, the embodiment of the Black Plague, often appearing as a tall, thin woman in a black cloak, walking along deserted roads. Those who see Pesta and follow her never return. Perhaps sometimes, intersections not found on maps can lead us to places that don't belong to this world. And perhaps not all who get lost in the fog find their way back like Jack. So if you're driving on a thick, foggy night and suddenly see an intersection that shouldn't exist, trust your instincts. And if you look in your rearview mirror and see blinding headlights behind you but hear no engine sound, I advise you not to stop. Don't turn your head to look. Just keep driving until you find light, life, and the world you know. This is Morgan Hayes, and you're listening to Late Night Stories Radio. Stay with us. When we return, I'll tell you about the game of lights and the woman who encountered something in an apartment building basement. Welcome back to Late Night Stories Radio. I'm Morgan Hayes, your companion through the dark corners of the world. Rain has started to fall again outside my studio, a heavy downpour drumming on the wooden roof like 1,000 tapping fingers. That sound usually brings me comfort, but tonight it reminds me of footsteps. Countless footsteps drawing closer in the dark. When we were children, many of us feared the dark. We pleaded with our parents for nightlights, checked under our beds, and avoided the dark corners of our rooms. As we grew up, most of us overcame that fear. We told ourselves that darkness is merely the absence of light, nothing to be afraid of. But perhaps deep down in our subconscious, we still know that fear isn't entirely baseless. Perhaps sometimes, in certain places, darkness isn't just the absence of light, it's the presence of something else. Today, I received a letter from Sarah Castillo, a maintenance worker at an old apartment building in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Listen to her story. Dear Morgan, I've been following your podcast for the past 6 months, but never thought I'd be writing to you. I always considered ghost stories as mere entertainment, until 3 weeks ago. I work as a maintenance technician at an old apartment building in downtown Buenos Aires. The building was constructed in the 1930s, a beautiful piece of architecture, but showing its age. My job is to fix minor issues: leaky pipes, broken light bulbs, things like that. The basement has always been my least favorite place. It's vast, dark, and filled with old machinery from when the building was first constructed, but we still use it to store equipment and house the backup generator. That evening, around 11 p.m., we had a power outage. Suddenly, the entire building went dark. This sometimes happens in our area during storms, but that night, the sky was clear. I was called to check the main circuit breaker in the basement. I'm not afraid of the dark. 10 years of working with electrical systems has accustomed me to making repairs in dimly lit spaces. I carried a powerful LED flashlight and a walkie-talkie to communicate with the building manager upstairs. I descended the basement stairs, moving deeper into the darkness. The basement is enormous, with many rooms and corridors. The main circuit breaker is at the end of a long corridor, in a room with a generator room sign hanging on the door. I'd walked this path hundreds of times, but that night it seemed longer, darker than usual. When I opened the generator room door, I heard a strange sound. Not the generator, it was still off, but a faint humming, as if electricity was running through wires. But how could that be when the entire building was out of power? I shone my flashlight around the room and saw the main circuit breaker was tripped. This explained the outage. I approached to switch it back on. But as I was a few steps away, the fluorescent lights on the ceiling of the room suddenly flickered on. At first, I thought someone had restored power from upstairs, but the lights weren't steady. They blinked on and off at irregular intervals, creating a dazzling, disco-like light effect. In that flickering light, I saw the generator, a massive, old machine from the 50s, gently vibrating. I tried to communicate via walkie-talkie, but only received static. Deciding to switch the breaker back on first, I stepped towards the electrical panel. The moment I touched the switch, the generator suddenly let out a horrific shriek, a metallic sound that tore through the space as if it were in pain. Then it fell silent. In that moment of stillness, I felt something else in the room with me. Not the usual vague feeling of being alone in the dark, but a certainty that someone or something was watching. The fluorescent lights continued to flicker, and in a moment of light, I saw a small crack in the side of the generator. A crack I was certain hadn't been there during previous inspections. From that crack emanated a blinding white light, far brighter than the fluorescent bulbs. The light moved as if it were searching for something. And then I saw it. In the flickering light, I saw a faint, shadowy figure standing between me and the exit. A vague, human-like shape, as if made of smoke and shadows. It wasn't standing upright but leaning, like a drunk person, or as if it was struggling to maintain its form. The smell of burning oil and coal dust filled the space, making it hard to breathe. But the worst part was the sound. An incessant whisper, too faint for me to make out the words, but clear enough for me to know it was a human voice, or once was. The shadowy figure took a step forward, and in the flickering light, I saw that it had no face, just a pitch-black void where eyes, nose, and mouth should be. I screamed. I don't know what I did. Perhaps I flipped the circuit breaker in a panic, but suddenly the entire electrical system came back on. The fluorescent lights shone steadily, and the shadowy figure vanished. I don't remember how I ran up the stairs, only that I ran non-stop until I was out of the building and into the fresh air of the Buenos Aires night. The next day, when I was calmer, I went back to the basement with 2 colleagues. Everything looked normal. The generator was still there, old but with no cracks, no smell of burning oil or coal dust. But as I got closer, I still felt that presence, as if it was waiting for the darkness to return. I looked into the building's history afterward. It turns out that before it became an apartment building in the 1930s, this place was once a small factory. A fire in 1928 killed 5 workers. All of them died in the boiler room, which is now the generator room. I still work there, but I never go down to the basement alone after sunset, and I always carry a backup flashlight. I don't know what happened that night, whether it was an hallucination due to fatigue or something else. But I know one thing: sometimes darkness isn't just the absence of light. Sometimes it's something alive, waiting and remembering. Sarah Castillo. After receiving Sarah's letter, I looked into the Buenos Aires fire she mentioned. I found a short newspaper article from 1928 describing an industrial tragedy that killed 5 workers in a small factory. According to the article, the fire started with a boiler explosion, and the victims were trapped in the machine room, unable to escape because the door was jammed. Notably, the article mentioned witness accounts of strange lights from the basement windows before the fire broke out. Not flames, but a blinding white light that they initially thought was from welding. In many cultures, it's believed that souls who die in violent or sudden circumstances become trapped at the place of their death. Unable to accept or comprehend their demise, they repeat their final moments, trying to find a different ending. Perhaps that's what's happening in Sarah's basement. The spirits of the workers, still confused and in pain after nearly a century, are still searching for an escape. Or perhaps, as some cultures believe, intense tragedy can leave a mark on space and time itself, a small crack where the past leaks into the present. Whatever the explanation, Sarah's story reminds us that sometimes history isn't just recorded in books. Sometimes it lives on in old walls, in long dormant machines, and in the dark corners of rooms where people met tragic ends. So if you ever find yourself alone in an old basement and the lights begin to flicker erratically, listen. Not to the sound of machinery or faulty electrical systems, but to the whispers behind those sounds. Because perhaps, just perhaps, it's the voices of those still trapped in their final moments, still trying to find their way out. This is Morgan Hayes, and you're listening to Late Night Stories Radio. Stay with us. When we return, I'll tell you about room 404 and the man who heard a call from behind a locked door. Welcome back to Late Night Stories Radio. I'm Morgan Hayes, host of the Unexplainable stories. The rain has stopped, only a few scattered drops falling on the roof. The forest around my studio has fallen silent. A stillness almost palpable, thick and heavy. In moments like these, when the world seems to hold its breath, I often wonder if I'm the only one awake or if something else is listening in the dark. Today, I received an audio recording from Ethan Mitchell, a janitor working at an office building in Toronto, Canada. He sent me an audio file recorded on his phone, accompanied by a brief explanation. I'll play that recording for you, but first, let me read his email. Hello, Morgan. I've been listening to your show for a while and have wanted to share this story many times. But I always convinced myself that what I experienced was just my imagination, or a prank by a colleague, or anything other than what I deeply feared it was. I work as a janitor at an old office building in Toronto's financial district. The building was constructed in the 1970s, is 15 stories tall, and has gone through several owners over the years. Currently, it's mostly leased out as small offices for startups and small to medium businesses. I work the night shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. My job is to clean offices after hours, mop hallways, empty trash, things like that. Usually, I work alone. Sometimes, there's a night guard patrolling the building. About 3 months ago, I was working on the 4th floor when I noticed something strange. This floor has a row of small offices numbered 401 to 412. But that night, as I pushed my cleaning cart down the hallway, I saw a door I'd never noticed before, room 404. At first, I thought I must have overlooked it previously. After all, I often work with headphones on, not paying too much attention to my surroundings. I went to check, but the door was locked. Nothing unusual there, many offices are locked at night. But as I looked closer, I noticed this door looked different. It seemed older, with a style that didn't match the rest of the building. The paint was peeling at the corners, and the lock looked like an old mechanical lock from the 50s, not the modern keycard system the other offices used. I was curious, so I asked Omar, the night guard, about this room. He looked puzzled and said there was no room 404. Just 401 to 412, skipping 404 for superstitious reasons. 404 is the not found error code on the internet, and some buildings avoid using this number, much like they skip the 13th floor. The next night I went back to check. The room was still there. This time I noticed another detail, a dark red stain, looking like dried blood, running along the bottom of the door and spreading onto the floor. This stain wasn't clearly visible in normal hallway light, only when I shone my flashlight directly on it. I mopped the floor as usual, but the stain didn't disappear. It seemed to be beneath the paint and concrete, as if it had soaked into the very material of the building. In the following weeks, I started paying more attention to that mysterious room. Sometimes when I passed by, I felt the temperature drop suddenly. A few times, I heard sounds coming from inside, not voices or distinct noises, but a continuous, faint sound, like someone turning pages or softly tapping fingers on a desk. Then, about a month ago, things escalated. I was mopping the floor near that room around 2 a.m. when I heard knocking from inside, 3 clear, deliberate knocks. I stood motionless, unsure what to do. Then the knocking repeated, this time louder. I told myself that maybe someone was working late, although that didn't make sense. The building was closed, and I saw no light from under the door. I approached and called out, "Hello, is anyone in there?" No answer. But then, as I pressed my ear to the door to listen, I heard a voice, a hoarse voice, as if it hadn't been used in years, whispering 3 clear words. "Open for me." I stumbled back in fear. The door began to vibrate gently, as if someone was pushing from inside. The paint on the door peeled off in flakes, and the dried blood stain seemed to spread before my eyes, seeping along the cracks in the concrete. I recorded part of this on my phone. I've attached the audio file. It's not very clear. I was trembling when I recorded, but if you turn up the volume, you can hear the knocking, the creaking of the door, and that voice. I ran away after that and told Omar everything. He thought I was joking or trying to scare him. We went back to the 4th floor together. But when we got there, there was no room 404. Just an empty wall between rooms 403 and 405. I tried to research the history of this building. It turns out that before it was renovated into offices in the 1970s, it used to be a small psychiatric hospital. I didn't find much information, but there was a fire in 1962 that killed several patients. The article didn't go into detail, but mentioned that the fire started in a special treatment room on the 4th floor. I still work there, but now I always avoid the 4th floor unless absolutely necessary, and when I have to go there, I work as quickly as possible. But sometimes, when I push my cleaning cart down the silent hallway in the middle of the night, I still feel something watching me from a room that shouldn't exist. Ethan Mitchell. I listened to the audio recording Ethan sent. Most of it was background noise and his heavy breathing. But if you turn up the volume and filter out the static, you can hear knocking, 3 clear knocks, then 3 more. After that, a faint creaking as if wood or metal was straining. And just as Ethan said, there was a voice, very faint but clear enough to make out. Open for me. I did a bit of research on the building Ethan mentioned. He was right about its history. It was indeed the Lakewood Psychiatric Asylum from 1932 to 1965 before being sold and renovated into offices. The 1962 fire was documented in several local reports, killing 4 patients and 1 staff member. Interestingly, I found an article from 1960 mentioning allegations of special treatment methods at the asylum. According to the article, some patients were confined in isolated rooms, not listed in official records, where they underwent experimental procedures, including high-intensity electroshock therapy and lobotomies. The investigation went nowhere due to lack of evidence, and the asylum continued to operate until the fire. Sometimes, intense suffering can imprint itself onto the very fabric of a place, like a wound that never fully heals. It can hide beneath new paint, behind new walls, but never truly disappear. And sometimes, the boundary between past and present, between what is lost and what remains, becomes so thin that it can break. Perhaps that is what's happening with room 404. A pocket of space where time is bent, where a part of the old building and the souls still trapped within it sometimes manifest in our world. Like the 404 error on the internet, it simultaneously exists and does not exist. So if you ever work in an old building and come across a door you've never noticed before, be careful. If you hear knocking from behind that door or a voice whispering, "Open for me," I advise you not to comply. Because sometimes, locked doors are not meant to keep us out, but to keep something in. This is Morgan Hayes, and you're listening to Late Night Stories Radio. Stay with us. When we return, I'll tell you about the hanging cry on the stairs and the student who encountered something unexplainable in an apartment building in Tokyo. Welcome back to Late Night Stories Radio. I'm Morgan Hayes, your companion through stories from beyond the veil. Outside my studio, the wind has started to pick up, whistling through the trees, creating a sound like 1,000 whispering voices. Tonight is a strange night. The air seems heavier, as if time is slowing down and the distance between our world and the other is shrinking. Speaking of distance, there are many places in the world where the boundary between life and death seems thinner. One such place is the old apartment buildings in Tokyo, Japan, cramped, high-rise buildings where thousands of people live side by side, sometimes unaware of who their neighbors are. In such crowded spaces, with their long histories, sometimes the unexplainable finds a place to reside. Today, I received a letter from Emma Chen, an exchange student from Canada living in Tokyo. She wrote to me about a strange experience in her apartment building. Listen to her story. Dear Morgan, I've been following your podcast since I was in Vancouver, and I never thought I'd have a story to tell one day. But after what happened last month, I need to share it with someone, and I can't tell my friends or family. They'll think I'm overly stressed or sleep-deprived. I've been living in Tokyo for 7 months as an exchange student, studying Japanese language and culture. Due to a tight budget, I rent a small apartment in an old complex in Nakano District, a 15-story building built in the 1970s called Sakura Heights. My apartment is on the 8th floor, small but comfortable, and I'd been living there quite happily until recently. The building has 2 staircases, a main one with elevators and an emergency exit staircase at the back. The emergency staircase is a metal structure attached to the outside of the building, surrounded by concrete walls with small windows every few floors. It's rarely used unless there's an issue with the elevator. It all started about a month ago. I was doing homework late around 1 a.m. when I heard crying. At first, I thought it was a cat. The building allows pets and there are a few stray cats in the area, but as I listened more closely, I realized it was a child's cry. The crying seemed to come from the emergency exit staircase. It wasn't continuous. It would sometimes sob, then fall silent, then resume. I could hear it because my apartment is near the exit door. The strange thing was, it didn't sound like a normal child crying from pain or fear. It was sadder, as if the child was crying from losing something. I decided to check. Perhaps a child was lost or needed help. I put on my coat, grabbed my phone and flashlight, and stepped into the hallway. The building was silent at that hour. Only the hum of the air conditioning and vending machines in the hallway echoed. When I opened the emergency exit staircase door, a blast of cold wind rushed in. The staircase was pitch black, only a few red emergency lights dimly lit the way. The crying stopped when I entered, but after a few seconds it resumed. This time it was clearer and I could pinpoint it coming from above. I started climbing, shining my flashlight ahead. The metal staircase echoed under my feet. The sound reverberated in the narrow space. The crying continued, but now I could hear something else. A small, choked voice calling, "Mama," in Japanese. I went up a few floors and the crying was still above. The strange thing was, no matter how many floors I ascended, the sound always remained 1 or 2 floors above me. When I reached the 12th floor, I started to feel uneasy. Not from fear, but a deep sense of sadness, as if the child's sorrow was seeping into me. Finally, I reached the 13th floor, and the crying seemed to come from just above, the 14th or 15th floor. But when I reached the 14th floor, I noticed something strange. The crying had stopped, completely silent. I shone my flashlight around the staircase and saw something that made my blood run cold. On the concrete floor were small water stains, but they weren't ordinary water stains. They were shaped like tears. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, of small, dried tear stains formed patterns on the concrete surface. I panicked, switched my phone to video mode, and started recording. I've attached this video in the email. You can see those strange tear stains and perhaps feel the fear in my voice. As soon as I started recording, the emergency lights began to flicker. Not a malfunction, but a steady rhythm, as if someone was deliberately flicking a switch. And then, from the very top of the staircase, the 15th floor, I heard soft footsteps. Not adult footsteps, but the quick, light steps of a child. I didn't wait to see what would appear. I turned and ran down the stairs so fast I nearly fell several times. I didn't stop until I reached my apartment, locked the door, and pulled the curtains shut. The next morning, when I was calmer, I asked the building manager if any families with small children lived on the 14th or 15th floor. He replied that no one lived on the 15th floor. The entire floor was under renovation. The 14th floor only had an elderly couple and a single man. I also asked if the building had any special history. He reluctantly told me that in 1987, there was a murder in this building. A young woman jumped from the 15th floor emergency staircase with her 5-year-old daughter. The mother died instantly, but the child survived for several hours, continuously calling for her mother until she passed away on the way to the hospital. I searched online and found a few old articles about the incident. It seemed the mother had suffered from severe depression after her husband abandoned them. Neighbors reported hearing the child cry for hours that night before everything happened. Since then, I still hear that crying on certain nights, usually on rainy or especially quiet nights. I never leave my apartment after midnight anymore, and I always wear headphones when studying late. I don't know what happened that night. Did I really hear the crying of a child who died over 30 years ago, or was it just my imagination, triggered by an old building with strange sounds and eerie stories? But those tear stains, they were real. They're still there. Every time I'm brave enough to check the staircase during the day, they never completely dry, never disappear, as if that child is still crying, still searching for the mother who abandoned her in the most horrific way. Emma Chen. I watched the video Emma sent. It was shot in the dim light of emergency lamps, viewed through a lens of fear. But just as she described, there were strange water stains on the concrete floor. Small marks shaped like dried tears. And at the end of the video, as Emma started to pan upwards towards the staircase, a very faint sound could be heard, like soft footsteps on metal. I looked into the 1987 incident at Sakura Heights. It was recorded in several local papers, but wasn't major news. A 28-year-old mother, Yumiko Tanaka, jumped from the 15th floor emergency staircase with her 5-year-old daughter, Akiko. According to neighbors, Yumiko suffered from severe depression after her husband left her for another woman. That night, many heard Akiko crying for hours, calling for her mother, but no one intervened. In Japanese culture, there's a concept called kodama, the echo of a soul. It's believed that when a person dies in tragic circumstances, especially with strong emotions like fear or sadness, their spirit can leave an imprint in that space. A loop of the final moments, repeating endlessly. Perhaps that's what's happening in the emergency staircase of Sakura Heights. Akiko's crying, her tears, her desperate call, "Mama," all trapped in an endless loop, waiting for a different ending that never comes. It's worth noting that in many cultures, the number 13 is considered unlucky. In Japan, the number 4 is considered unlucky because its pronunciation is similar to the word for death. But in Emma's story, the 13th floor is where the crying seemed clearest, perhaps another liminal layer where the worlds of the living and the dead intersect. So if you ever find yourself in an old building and hear a child's crying from a deserted staircase in the middle of the night, ask yourself if it's truly a child in need of help, or the echo of a tragedy that happened long ago. And if you decide to investigate, be prepared for the possibility that sometimes, cries from the past can touch your heart in ways you never imagined. This is Morgan Hayes, and you're listening to Late Night Stories Radio. Stay with us. When we return, I'll tell you about the broken mirror room and the travel blogger who witnessed something unexplainable in an old homestay in Chiang Mai. Welcome back to Late Night Stories Radio. I'm Morgan Hayes, your companion through stories from the Twilight Zone. The night deepens, and the wind still howls outside my studio. Branches scrape against the window like skeletal fingers trying to find their way in. On nights like these, I often wonder if that tapping is really just branches or something else trying to get my attention. Tonight, I want to talk about mirrors, familiar objects we use every day without much thought. But in many cultures, mirrors are considered portals between our world and the other side. Ancient Romans believed a mirror contained the soul of the person looking into it. In Chinese culture, mirrors are seen as objects that ward off evil spirits. And there's a common belief that if you look into a mirror at midnight, you might see things that don't belong to this world. I just received a voicemail from Zoe Blackwood, an Australian travel blogger. She contacted me about a strange experience during her recent trip to Chiang Mai, Thailand. Listen to her story. Hello, Morgan. I'm a long-time listener of your podcast, but never thought I'd have a story to share. I've always been a pragmatist, believing in what can be seen and touched. But after my trip to Chiang Mai last month, I'm no longer sure about anything. I'm a travel blogger, specializing in lesser-known destinations and authentic local experiences. I usually avoid luxury hotels and instead opt for homestays or small guest houses for a more genuine cultural experience. In Chiang Mai, I booked a room at an old homestay in the Old City, a traditional teak wood house over 100 years old. The owner, an elderly Thai woman named Kai, was very friendly and welcoming. She gave me a room numbered 7 on the 2nd floor of the house. The room was beautiful, with gleaming teak wood floors, antique furniture, and a small balcony overlooking the Old City. But what caught my attention was a large mirror with an intricately carved wooden frame hanging on the wall opposite the bed. The mirror frame was carved with dragons and ancient Thai symbols. Kai said this mirror had belonged to her family for generations and, traditionally, was hung in the room reserved for honored guests. The first 2 days were wonderful. I explored the city, enjoyed local cuisine, and filmed videos for my blog. On the 3rd night, I decided to do a live stream for my followers, showcasing the room and sharing my homestay experience. The live stream started around 9:00 p.m. I set my phone on a small tripod and began talking about the house, its history, and the interesting features of the room. Everything was normal for the first 15 minutes or so. I was describing the antique mirror when I noticed something strange in the live stream comments. Viewers started asking about the man standing behind me. The problem was, there was no one else in the room. I turned to look and saw nothing. When I turned back to the screen, I saw viewers continue to mention a shadowy figure behind me, especially when I stood near the mirror. Some even took screenshots and sent them to me, showing a faint figure reflected in the mirror, even though no one was standing in that position in the actual room. I tried to remain calm, thinking it was just a lighting effect or a camera glitch. I continued the live stream but shifted to talking about other topics and stayed away from the mirror. About 10 minutes later, as I was talking about local food, I heard a strange sound, a soft cracking, as if wood or glass was straining. It came from the direction of the mirror. I turned the camera towards it, and just as I did, the mirror started to crack. Not cracks from physical impact, but small fissures appearing from within, spreading like a spider web. Everyone on the live stream saw this happening in real time. I stood there, utterly stunned, unsure what to do. Then, as the cracks spread across the entire mirror surface, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A pair of glowing red eyes stared back at me from inside the fractured mirror. Not my reflection, nor anyone else's in the room. Those eyes were filled with, I don't know how to describe it, Morgan, but it was a feeling as if they were burning my soul. I screamed and ended the live stream immediately. In a moment of panic, I turned on my phone's flashlight and shone it around the room, searching for something that could explain this phenomenon. Nothing. The mirror was now completely fractured, but no pieces had fallen to the floor. They remained stuck to the frame, forming a distorted, shattered surface. My heart pounded, and I felt a cold gust of air sweep through the room, even though all windows and doors were closed. I grabbed my suitcase and ran down the stairs, deciding I couldn't stay another night. Kai was still awake, watching TV in the living room. When I told her about the mirror, her face went pale. Instead of surprise or disbelief, she nodded as if she understood what had happened and asked me a strange question. "Did you look into the mirror at midnight?" I said no. My live stream started at 9:00 and ended before 10:00. She seemed a little relieved but still worried. She explained that according to traditional Thai beliefs, antique mirrors can become portals to another world, especially at transitional times like midnight or dusk. The mirror in my room had a special history. It once belonged to a famous monk who was believed to have the ability to communicate with the spirit world. Kai took me to another room and performed a small ritual with incense and prayers to protect me. She said she would ask a monk to purify the mirror the next day. I stayed at the homestay for one more night in the new room but didn't sleep much. The next morning, I moved to a modern hotel in another part of the city. The strange thing is, when I reviewed the live stream video, the part where the mirror cracked was completely corrupted. The screen only showed horizontal lines and white noise for about 30 seconds. Then the video ended. But I still have the screenshots that viewers sent me, showing the faint figure in the mirror before it cracked. I don't know what happened that night. Was the antique mirror truly a portal to another world, as Kai said, or was it just a combination of an old house, poor lighting, and an overactive imagination? But that doesn't explain why the mirror cracked right before my eyes or what I saw in it. I tried to learn more about beliefs related to mirrors in Thai culture and found that in Thai Buddhism, mirrors are sometimes used in Phet Phra * rituals, ceremonies for exorcism and communication with the spirit world. The mirror is considered a thin boundary between the physical and spiritual realms. Whatever the explanation, I know one thing: I will never look at mirrors the same way again, especially antique mirrors in old houses. After receiving Zoe's voicemail, I looked further into beliefs related to mirrors in Thai culture. As she mentioned, in Thai Buddhism, there is a ritual called * Phet Phra where mirrors play a significant role as a gateway to the spiritual world. I also found an ancient legend about the Mai Nag * mirror, a mirror believed to be able to show the true form of non-human entities and demons when they disguise themselves as humans. According to the legend, these mirrors must be crafted through a special process and blessed by monks. Interestingly, I found some information about the Chiang Mai area where Zoe stayed. It turns out that the old city was once home to a famous monk in the early 20th century who was widely believed to have the ability to see and communicate with the spirit world. His name was Kruba Srivachai, and he was known for using spiritual items, including mirrors, in his rituals. In many cultures, mirrors are not just everyday objects. They are symbols of truth, of the soul, and of the fragile boundary between our world and the other side. Perhaps that's why we have so many superstitions about mirrors. Don't break a mirror, or you'll have 7 years of bad luck. Don't look into a mirror at midnight. Cover mirrors when someone new has died in the house. Perhaps deep in our collective subconscious, we know that mirrors don't just reflect our image. Sometimes, they reflect things from beyond the veil. Things that shouldn't exist in our world. Things just waiting for a door to open. So the next time you stand before an antique mirror in an old house, look closely at the darkness behind your reflection. And if you see eyes that aren't yours staring back, remember that not everything looking back at us from beyond the mirror belongs to this world. This is Morgan Hayes, and you're listening to Late Night Stories Radio. Stay with us. When we return, I'll tell you about the Red Lips Corridor and the man who heard whispers in an abandoned hospital. Welcome back to Late Night Stories Radio. I'm Morgan Hayes, your companion on a journey into stories from the darkness. The night has deepened, and my small studio in Whispering Pines Forest has become strangely quiet. The wind has stopped blowing, the rain has ceased, and the world outside seems to be holding its breath, waiting. In moments of such stillness, even the ticking of the clock becomes too loud, and I can hear the blood flowing in my own veins. Today, I received a strange voicemail, no sender name, no phone number, just an audio file sent to the show's email inbox. I've listened to it many times, and each time I feel a chill run down my spine. It's the voice of a man, whispering urgently as if he's afraid of being heard. He introduces himself as Daniel Rodriguez, a security guard from Detroit, Michigan, and this is his story. I don't know if this message will reach you, Morgan. I'm recording it in the guard room of Mercy Hospital, or what used to be Mercy Hospital. This place has been abandoned for over 10 years now, ever since they built a new medical facility on the north side of the city. I work for a private security company responsible for monitoring many abandoned buildings owned by the city of Detroit or private companies. My job is to patrol, ensure no trespassers, no homeless people sleeping there, and report any signs of vandalism. Mercy Hospital is one of the locations I visit twice a week. It's a large, 8-story building constructed in the 1940s. It was once a major public hospital serving most of downtown Detroit. But after the economic crisis, it closed down and was abandoned. Now it's just a hollow shell. Long, empty corridors, patient rooms without beds, and medical equipment long since removed or stolen. I've been doing this job for 3 years, and I'm used to abandoned buildings. Detroit has a lot of them. I'm not easily startled by strange sounds or darkness. But Mercy Hospital, there's something about this place that always makes me uneasy. 2 months ago, during a routine night patrol, I was walking through the main corridor of the 4th floor, an area that used to be the maternity ward. The corridor was long, with patient rooms on both sides and a nurse's station in the middle. The white-painted walls had yellowed and peeled, the vinyl floor was cracked, and the ceiling leaked, forming black puddles in some areas. I was shining my flashlight down the corridor when I noticed something strange on the wall at the far end. I approached and saw it was an old poster, one of the hospital's advertisements about healthcare. The poster showed a pair of deep red lips smiling, with the words "Talk to your doctor" at the bottom. Most of the text had faded, but the deep red lips were still clear, as if newly printed. I found it odd that this poster was here. I had walked through this corridor dozens of times before and never noticed it. Perhaps it was obscured by something previously, or perhaps I simply wasn't paying attention. As I continued my patrol, I started noticing more similar posters along the corridor. All of them displayed the same deep red lips with different faded texts. I started to feel uncomfortable. How could I have overlooked so many posters in previous patrols? As I passed the nurse's station, I smelled something, a sweet, metallic scent, like lipstick mixed with rust water. It wasn't strong, but clear enough for me to notice in the damp, musty air of the abandoned building. I was about to continue when I heard a faint sound, a soft sniffle, as if someone was inhaling through a stuffy nose. It came from right behind me, so close I could feel a breath on my neck. I spun around, shining my flashlight into the darkness. Nothing, just the empty corridor and the red-lit posters. "Hello, is anyone there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice professional, even though my heart was pounding. No answer, but as I turned to continue walking, I heard that sound again. This time, right next to my right ear, and with it, a faint whisper, "Kiss me." I froze. That voice wasn't a real person's voice. It was too wet, as if someone was speaking with a mouth full of water. I spun around again, shining my flashlight everywhere, but still saw no one. But when I shone the light on one of the posters, I saw a shiny, wet streak on the red lips, as if someone had just applied fresh lipstick. That's when I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I ran down the corridor, down the stairs, and out of the building without looking back. I even dropped my right safety shoe in my haste, but I didn't stop to pick it up. The next morning, I was ashamed of my reaction. I convinced myself it was just an overactive imagination, perhaps due to fatigue or the ghost stories my colleagues tell about abandoned buildings. I decided to go back during the day to retrieve my lost shoe and prove to myself that there was nothing to be afraid of. I arrived at the hospital around midday when the sunlight streamed through the dirty windows, creating streaks of light on the dusty floor. I climbed to the 4th floor and walked along the corridor to the nurse's station where I thought I'd dropped my shoe. In the daylight, the corridor looked completely different. There were no posters at all, just bare walls with peeling paint and water stains. I found my shoe near the nurse's station and quickly picked it up. As I was about to turn back, I noticed something on the wall that I hadn't been able to see at night. Beneath the peeling paint was an old layer of wallpaper, and on it, I could see faint images. Lips, many lips printed on the wallpaper in a repeating pattern, faded to a deep reddish brown. I researched the hospital's history afterward. It turns out the 4th floor wasn't always the maternity ward. From the 1940s to the mid-1960s, it was the plastic surgery department, specializing in reconstructive procedures for people with burns and deformities. One of the most common surgeries was lip reconstruction for severely burned victims. Last week, I had to go back to the 4th floor for a routine patrol. I tried to convince myself there was nothing to be afraid of, that my imagination had gotten the better of me last time. But as I stepped into the corridor, that smell returned sweet, metallic, and now with a foul odor I couldn't identify. I shone my flashlight along the wall and saw that the wallpaper had changed. The lips were no longer faint prints. They stood out in bright red, as if freshly painted, and they were bleeding. Streams of dark red liquid oozed from the corners of the lips, flowing down the wall like crimson tears. I stood there, unable to move, unable to breathe. Then I heard that sniffle again, right behind me, and the whisper, "Kiss me, please." I didn't turn around. I didn't run. I just stood there, closed my eyes, and murmured a prayer I hadn't said since I was a child. When I opened my eyes, everything was back to normal. The old wallpaper with the faint lips, no blood, no smell, no whisper. I quickly finished the rest of my patrol and left the building. I requested a different patrol route, but my boss refused due to staffing shortages. So here I am again, in Mercy Hospital, recording this message in the 1st floor guard room before I'm forced to go up to the 4th floor again. I don't know what's happening here. Maybe I'm losing my mind. Or maybe the people who lay on the operating tables on the 4th floor, the ones who endured pain to get new lips, are still here, still seeking validation that they are beautiful again. I have to go now. My patrol is about to start. If anyone hears this message, please pray for me. And if you ever hear a whisper, "Kiss me," in the dark, please don't turn around. Never turn around. That was the voicemail I received. I tried to contact Daniel Rodriguez again, but the phone number used to send the message was no longer active. I searched for information about Mercy Hospital in Detroit and found that it did indeed exist. A large medical facility that closed in 2009 and remained abandoned until recently when it was sold to a real estate development company with plans for renovation into luxury apartments. I also found documentation confirming that the hospital's 4th floor was indeed the reconstructive surgery department from 1942 to 1968, specializing in procedures for war victims and industrial accidents. A newspaper article from 1953 praised their work in helping burn victims regain their smiles through advanced lip reconstruction surgery. But what worried me most was a small news item I found in a local Detroit newspaper published just 1 week after I received the voicemail. It mentioned an unnamed security guard found in a state of panic outside the Old Mercy Hospital, with severe self-inflicted injuries to his mouth and lips. The man was taken to the hospital in critical condition and is currently receiving psychiatric treatment. I don't know if that was Daniel, but the timing is disturbingly coincidental. And I can't help but wonder if Daniel truly heard the whispers, "Kiss me," in that corridor. Did he finally succumb to that invitation? In many cultures, a kiss is not just a gesture of affection, it's also a symbolic act, a way of exchanging souls. Perhaps that's why we should be careful of lips whispering invitations in the dark. Because sometimes a kiss isn't just a kiss. Sometimes it's a door opening to something else, something hungry and never satisfied. So if you ever walk through the dark corridors of an abandoned hospital and hear a sweet whisper, "Kiss me," from the shadows, remember that not every invitation should be accepted, and not every mouth is meant to be kissed. This is Morgan Hayes, and you're listening to Late Night Stories Radio. Stay with us. When we return, I'll tell you about the old phone booth and the man who heard a call from the past. Welcome back to Late Night Stories Radio. I'm Morgan Hayes, your companion through the night and unexplainable stories. The rain has returned, but it's no longer as heavy as before. Now, it's a gentle drizzle creating a soothing sound on the wooden roof of the studio. There's a strange comfort in the sound of the rain, as if it's washing away the dark stories we've just shared, preparing for the new ones to come. Tonight, I want to talk about how we connect with each other, not through the internet or smartphones, but through older means. Before smartphones, even before landlines in homes, there were public phone booths, small structures of metal and glass standing alone by the roadside, where people could stop and call loved ones. Today, most of those phone booths have disappeared, relics of another era. But in some places, especially in the rural areas of the UK, you can still find them. Standing alone by deserted roads like portals to the past. Today, I received an email from Noah Winters, a landscape photographer and mountaineer, as he describes himself, from London, but frequently traveling across the UK to take photos. He shared with me a strange experience he encountered on a recent trip to rural Wales. Listen to his story. Dear Morgan, I've been listening to your podcast for a while, usually when driving between shooting locations in the late hours. It's strange to think that now I'm writing to you about my own experience. I'm a landscape photographer, and I often go to remote places to capture perfect moments of natural light. 2 weeks ago, I was in the Snowdonia region of North Wales, working on a project about forgotten country roads and hidden landscapes off the main tourist routes. I had spent the entire day exploring the rural roads around Bedoswaikoed, a small village deep in the mountains. As the sun began to set, I decided to drive back to the rural guest house where I was staying. But I got lost, which is understandable, as many roads here have no signs, and GPS is often unreliable in the deep valleys between the mountains. As night fell, I found myself driving on a narrow, winding road with high stone banks on both sides. No streetlights, no houses nearby, and no other vehicles. Just me, my car, and the pitch-black night of rural Wales. It started to rain, not heavy rain, but the persistent drizzle typical of Wales. The kind of rain that chills you to the bone. Visibility became poor, and I started to worry about finding my way back. Then, as I drove around a bend, my headlights shone on something by the roadside. An old red phone booth, typical of Britain, standing alone in the desolate landscape. It looked old and weathered, with peeling paint and opaque glass, but still recognizable with its distinctive bright red color. I was surprised to see it here, in the middle of nowhere. I thought most of these phone booths had disappeared, especially in remote areas like this. But then I realized this could be a good opportunity to call someone for help. My mobile phone hadn't had reception for miles. I parked by the roadside and ran to the phone booth in the rain. As I opened the glass door, I was surprised to see the light inside was still on. A pale yellow light, flickering unevenly. Inside the booth, it smelled of damp earth and rusty metal, but the phone was intact. An antique model with a rotary dial and a heavy black handset. I picked up the receiver, not really expecting it to work, but surprisingly, I heard a dial tone, a steady sound indicating the line was still active. I checked my pockets for coins. Old British phone booths required coins to make a call and luckily found a few pounds. I inserted a coin into the slot and prepared to dial the guest house number. But before I could start dialing, I heard a strange sound from the receiver. Not a dial tone anymore, but breathing. Slow, heavy breathing, as if someone was trying to catch their breath after a long run. I thought perhaps the line had accidentally connected to another call, so I asked, "Excuse me, is anyone there?" Silence for a moment, then a voice, an old man's voice with a heavy Welsh accent, replied, "I need advice." I didn't know how to respond. This clearly wasn't a normal connection. I asked, "Excuse me, who are you?" "I'm lost," the voice continued, as if it hadn't heard my question. "I don't know how to get home. It's been too long." There was something wrong with that voice. It sounded distant, as if coming from the other end of a long tunnel, and it had a strange, almost ancient quality. Not the kind of voice you'd hear in this day and age. "Where are you?" I asked, trying to keep my composure. "What can I help you with?" "They caught me," the voice said, now sounding like a whisper. "The men in black. They said I was a traitor, but I was just trying to keep my family alive. Do you understand? What must a man do to keep his family alive?" I started to feel a chill, and it wasn't from the rain. I'm not sure I understand. What are you talking about?" 1944, the voice was now almost inaudible. I gave them information, just small bits of information. No one was hurt, I swear, but they found me. They brought me here to this road. And the line suddenly filled with static, drowning out the voice. When the static faded, the voice returned, but now it sounded urgent, frightened. "They're coming. I can hear them. You have to help me. You have to tell Bronwyn and the children that I love them. Tell them I wasn't a traitor. Tell them then a sound, a terrible noise I cannot and do not want to describe. A cry of pain and then silence." I stood there, receiver still pressed to my ear, completely stunned. Then I heard the dial tone return, as if nothing had happened. My hands trembling, I slowly hung up the receiver. I don't know what had just happened, but I knew I needed to get out of there immediately. I opened the phone booth door and ran back to my car in the rain. As I started the engine and turned on the headlights, I looked back at the phone booth. In the headlights, I could clearly see how old and abandoned it was. The glass was broken, and the inside was completely dark, no pale yellow light. And on the phone booth door, something I hadn't noticed before, a small, faded sign, "Out of order since 1957. I drove away as fast as I could, fortunately finding my way back to Bedoswycoed village after about half an hour. The next morning, in daylight and with a clearer mind, I decided to go back to that road to see if I could find the phone booth, perhaps to prove to myself that I had just imagined everything or that there was a logical explanation. I drove the same route but couldn't find the phone booth anywhere. I even stopped and asked a local walking his dog if there was a phone booth on this road. He shook his head and said there hadn't been a phone booth here for at least 30 years. When I returned to London, I researched the history of that area during World War II. I discovered that the remote, mountainous Snowdonia region was once a refuge for several secret British intelligence units. There were reports of executions of suspected spies or traitors, though most were not officially recorded. I also found a small entry in a local newspaper from September 1944 about a local man named Gareth Lloyd who had mysteriously disappeared. According to the article, he was suspected of collaborating with the enemy, although no specific evidence was presented. He left behind his wife, Bronwyn, and 3 small children. I don't know if I truly spoke to the ghost of Gareth Lloyd, or if it was just my imagination combined with fatigue and bad weather. But I know one thing: I will never pick up the receiver of an old phone booth alone at night again. Noah Winters. After receiving Noah's email, I looked into the role of Wales in World War II. Indeed, the Snowdonia region was home to many secret training facilities and intelligence bases, thanks to its remote and rugged terrain. Many operations that took place there are still not fully declassified. I also found information about a phenomenon called phantom calls, or ghost calls, where people receive calls from deceased loved ones. In most cases, these calls occur shortly after the person's death, as a final farewell. But in some cases, like Noah's story, the call comes from a more distant past. There's an ancient belief that sound never truly disappears. It just becomes too faint for human ears to hear. Every word spoken, every cry, every final whisper remains there, echoing eternally in the air. Perhaps under certain conditions, those sounds can become strong enough for us to hear them again. Or perhaps, as some paranormal researchers suggest, time is not a straight line but a circle, and sometimes the boundary between past and present can blur. Old phone booths, with their simple, mechanical technology, might inadvertently become bridges between eras. Whatever the explanation, Noah's story reminds us that sometimes calls from the past can still echo into the present. And perhaps sometimes, those who are lost still need to be heard an apology, an explanation, a final goodbye. So if you ever drive down a deserted road on a rainy, windy night and see a faint light from an old phone booth, ask yourself if you're brave enough to pick up the receiver. And if you are you ready to hear what's waiting on the other end of the line? This is Morgan Hayes, and you're listening to Late Night Stories Radio. Stay with us. When we return, I'll tell you about the metro trapdoor and the woman who discovered something hidden beneath the abandoned tracks. Welcome back to Late Night Stories Radio. I'm Morgan Hayes, guiding you through stories from the Twilight Zone. The rain has stopped, and a strange stillness envelops the forest around my studio. No wind, no sounds of night animals, just an almost perfect silence. A silence that is sometimes more frightening than the loudest noise. Tonight, I want to talk about places we build and then abandon. Spaces once filled with life and activity, but now just empty shells of the past. Specifically, I want to talk about underground paths, abandoned tunnels, and subway stations lying dormant beneath our feet while the world above continues to move. New York City has one of the largest subway systems in the world, and also one of the most abandoned stations. Some of these stations have been closed for decades, forgotten by most of the city's residents, but not by all. Today, I received a video from Ava Reed, an urban explorer and blogger about New York City's urban history. She sent me a video she filmed in an abandoned subway station under Manhattan, along with an explanation of what she experienced. Listen to her story. Dear Morgan, I've been following your podcast for a while, and I think this story might fit your theme. It concerns an experience I had about 2 weeks ago at an abandoned subway station in Manhattan. First, I should explain a bit about my work. I'm an urban explorer and blogger specializing in New York City's forgotten history. I regularly explore abandoned places, industrial ruins, and strange spots that most city dwellers don't even know exist. I've published a book about New York's abandoned subway stations and regularly lead underground tour for those interested in urban history. While it might not be 100% legal, I've spent a lot of time in these abandoned tunnels and stations, documenting their history before they completely disappear. I'm used to the sounds, smells, and sensations of these spaces. I'm well aware of the strange echoes that reverberate through the tunnels, of light and shadow playing tricks on the eyes, and also of the actual inhabitants of these spaces, from rats and insects to homeless people seeking shelter. 2 weeks ago, I was researching for an article about Worth Street Station, an abandoned subway station beneath Manhattan's Lower East Side. This station closed in 1962 and has mostly been sealed off, but it's still accessible through some lesser-known entrances if you know where to look. I went there around 11:00 p.m., a time I knew there would be fewer railway maintenance workers in the area. I brought a powerful LED flashlight, my camera, and mobile live streaming equipment to document my exploration for my blog followers. I've done this many times before and always felt comfortable, although I always maintained appropriate caution. I found the entrance, an old basement window leading into a maintenance room, and then a long corridor leading to the main platform. When I entered, everything looked as I expected, dusty, dark, and quiet, with only the dripping of water and the sound of distant street traffic from above. I started my live stream, talking about the station's history and why it was closed, mainly because it was too close to another station, making it redundant. I spent about 20 minutes exploring the main platform area, filming the old architectural details and forgotten mosaic artwork. Then I noticed something I hadn't seen on previous visits: a small metal door at the end of the platform, almost hidden behind a pillar. On the door was a faded sign with the words "Danger, Do Not Enter," and a red emergency push button next to it. I was very curious. In all my research on this station, I had never seen any mention of such a door. I guessed it might lead to a maintenance room or perhaps a subsidiary tunnel used by railway staff. I decided to check it out for my live stream viewers. As I approached the door, I noticed it wasn't like the typical industrial doors I'd seen in the subway system. It looked older, made of a metal I couldn't immediately identify, and it seemed to be tightly sealed to the doorframe. Strangely, the door had no handle or lock, only the red emergency push button. I shone my flashlight around the door and noticed some symbols carved into the frame, not modern lettering, but ancient-looking symbols I didn't recognize. I filmed them up close for the live stream, wondering about their origin. Then I decided to press the red button. Mostly out of curiosity, I didn't really expect it to work. Most electrical equipment in abandoned stations has been defunct for a long time, but when I pressed the button, there was a faint click, and the door opened slightly, about an inch. At the same time, my flashlight flickered, and my phone screen, which I was using for the live stream, also flickered. From the crack in the door, I could see a faint light on the other side. Not electric light, but a strange, greenish-blue glow, almost phosphorescent. I felt a cold gust of air blow out from the crack, carrying a strange scent I couldn't quite describe, like a mixture of rusty metal, ozone, and something ancient. Not the smell of mold or decay, but the smell of time, if time had a smell. On the live stream, viewers started messaging, asking what I was seeing. Some said they could hear a strange sound on the stream, a steady tapping, almost like footsteps, though I didn't hear anything at the time. I put my hand on the door, intending to push it open wider, but as soon as I touched the metal, I felt a shiver run up my arm. Not an electrical shock, but a strange sensation, as if someone had just touched me in the same spot, but from the other side of the door. At that moment, my live stream started to glitch. Many viewers messaged that the screen was zooming, and they could see a shadowy figure standing behind me, even though I knew I was alone. My phone started to get hot in my hand, and the screen flickered with strange horizontal lines. I decided to open the door wider to see what was inside. As I pushed, the door suddenly became very heavy, as if someone was pulling it from the other side. But I still managed, and it opened a few more inches. Through the gap, I could see something that froze me in place. Not a maintenance room or a subsidiary tunnel, but a vast space with old tracks covered in moss. The strange blue light came from a type of bioluminescent moss covering the walls, and on the tracks, I could see something moving. Not humans, not animals, just blurry shapes moving at an unnatural speed, almost like fast-forwarded footage in an old film. I also saw something else: footprints on the damp ground near the tracks. But not human footprints or any animal footprints I'd ever seen. They were very large, with a shape I couldn't quite describe. And they seemed to lead towards the door, as if someone or something had walked towards the door from inside. That's when I heard a sound from behind the door, a metal grinding, screeching sound, as if an old train was moving forward. But the sound was wrong. It sounded like metal in pain, if that makes any sense. I let go of the door and stumbled back. Immediately, the door slammed shut with such force that I felt the floor shake beneath my feet. My phone completely powered off, even though the battery was still almost 90%. I'm not ashamed to say I ran then. I ran back the way I came, through the corridor, through the maintenance room, and out through the basement window. I didn't stop until I was back on the street, under the streetlights, amidst the normal night pedestrians. When I got home and calmed down, I checked my phone. It still wouldn't turn on until I removed the battery and put it back in. When it finally worked, I checked the live stream video, hoping to review what had happened and perhaps prove to myself that my imagination had run wild. But when I rewatched the video, it stopped right at the moment I approached the door. The subsequent moments when I pressed the button, when the door opened, and what I saw inside were completely gone. The video resumed at the part where I ran out of the station with a horrified expression on my face. I received many messages from viewers asking what had happened and why the stream was interrupted. Some sent screenshots they had taken during the missing period of the video. Most were just static and dark screens, but a few showed something that chilled me to the bone: a tall, thin figure standing right behind me, only partially visible in the darkness. I've attached one of these screenshots. I've spent the past 2 weeks researching the history of Worth Street Station, trying to find out about that door and where it might lead. I found some interesting and disturbing information. It turns out that in the original blueprints for the New York subway system from the early 1900s, there were plans to build a deeper network of tunnels beneath the existing ones. These tunnels were called the auxiliary infrastructure system and were designed to house additional infrastructure, pipes, and perhaps even subsidiary tracks. But this plan was canceled when workers began to dig deeper and encountered unexpected technical problems. That's how the official documents described it. But in some documents I found in the city's historical library, there were notes from workers and engineers describing strange discoveries as they dug deeper. Natural caves and unexplainable tunnels that existed before the city was built. Some notes even mentioned signs of prior use and traces of unknown civilizations. These workers also reported incidents, unexplainable equipment failures, strange noises, and several workers going missing while working in the deeper tunnels. Eventually, the entire project was canceled, and the entrances to these deeper areas were sealed. I believe the door I found was one of those seals. A door designed not to let people in, but to keep something out. I don't know what would have happened if I had opened the door wider. I don't know what those figures I saw on the tracks were, or whose or what those strange footprints belonged to. But I know one thing, I will not go back to Worth Street Station again. And if you come to New York and happen to find an old metal door with a red button, I urgently ask you not to press it. Ava read. I looked at the screenshot Ava sent. The quality wasn't good, full of static and blur, as if there was strong electromagnetic interference. But just as she described, there was a faint figure standing behind her, tall and thin with indistinct outlines. What worried me wasn't its presence, but the way it seemed not entirely solid, as if it was made of shadows and light rather than solid matter. I researched Worth Street Station and its history. It does exist and closed in 1962, as Ava said, and there were indeed original plans for an auxiliary infrastructure system beneath the main tunnels. Although most official documents only state that the project was canceled for technical and financial reasons. Interestingly, in many ancient cultures, especially Mayan and Greek, it was believed that the world was composed of multiple layers: the surface world where we live and the underworlds beneath, where other beings and entities reside. They built special doors and seals at places they believed were portals between these worlds. In Manhattan, before the arrival of Europeans, the indigenous Lenape tribes had legends of underground people, beings living in caves and tunnels beneath the island. They believed there were places where the boundary between our world and the world of the underground people became thin, and at those places, travel between worlds was possible. Are these legends just superstitions, or are they based on an ancient truth we've forgotten? And as we dig deeper into the earth to build our modern cities, do we inadvertently awaken things that have slept for thousands of years? I don't know what Ava actually saw behind that door. Perhaps it was just an old maintenance tunnel illuminated by bioluminescent bacteria or fungi, a natural phenomenon. Perhaps the light and shadow, combined with fatigue and a vivid imagination, created those moving figures and strange footprints. But it's also possible, just possible, that our cities are built on foundations older than we realize. And sometimes the places we abandon, the abandoned stations, the sealed tunnels, the locked doors still don't forget us. So if you ever explore an abandoned subway station and happen to find an old metal door with a red button, ask yourself what might lie on the other side, and more importantly, should it be opened? This is Morgan Hayes, and you're listening to Late Night Stories Radio. Stay with us. When we return, I'll tell you about the red firefly lake and the woman who encountered something strange in a Nordic forest. Welcome back to Late Night Stories Radio. I'm Morgan Hayes, your companion through the darkness and unexplainable stories. The night has deepened, and a thin crescent moon has appeared in the sky, casting faint light through the trees around my studio. In the dim moonlight, the familiar world can become alien, and ordinary shapes can transform into something else entirely. Moonlight and water have long been intimately linked in folklore and legend. From tidal waves to full moon rituals, people have always believed the moon possesses magical power over water. But sometimes that connection is deeper and stranger than we can imagine. Today, I received a letter from Olivia Bergman, a Swedish-American nature photographer. She sent me a series of strange photos taken at a remote lake in northern Sweden, along with the story of her unexplainable experience. Listen to her story. Dear Morgan, I've been listening to your show whenever I make long journeys, and I feel I need to share a recent experience with someone who won't think I've lost my mind. I'm a nature photographer specializing in freshwater ecosystems, lakes, swamps, and wetlands. My work has taken me to the most remote places in the world, but nowhere left an impression and horror like Blodstone in northern Sweden. Blodstone in Swedish means blood lake, a strange name I initially assumed came from the color of the surrounding rocks or perhaps some historical event. This lake is deep in the taiga forest, about 30 kilometers from the nearest village and only accessible by foot. It doesn't appear on most tourist maps, and I only learned about it through my grandmother, who was born in a small village nearby. She often told stories of a strange lake in the forest where stars fell and swam in the water like drops of blood. I always thought it was just an interesting folk tale until I researched bioluminescence in Northern Europe and stumbled upon a small note in an old scientific journal about unusual red bioluminescence observed at an unnamed lake in northern Sweden in the 1950s. I decided to explore this place for a book project on strange freshwater ecosystems. After following some clues from my grandmother's stories and old maps, I found the lake's location and planned a trip for June, a time when daylight is almost continuous at that latitude, but there are still a few hours of twilight and darkness each night. I arrived at the village of Orgrund, the closest village to the lake, and immediately noticed the locals' reluctance when I asked about Blodstone. Most said there was no such lake, or that it was too far and not interesting to explore. One elderly man even gripped my arm and said in Swedish, "The lights in the lake are not stars, they are eyes." Still, I was determined. I hired a local guide named Lars to drive me as close to the lake as possible by off-road vehicle. But he refused to accompany me all the way to the lake. He dropped me off about 5 kilometers from the lake, gave me a hand-drawn map, and promised to return 2 days later. Before leaving, he warned me not to stay at the lake after sunset and not to touch the water under any circumstances. I set up camp near the lake around midday. Blodstone is a small lake, perhaps only half a mile wide, nestled in a valley surrounded by tall pine trees. The water was inky black and strangely still. No birds, no insects hovering over the water, no signs of fish beneath the surface. The air around the lake was heavy and damp, with a sweet, almost metallic scent like iron. In daylight, the lake looked entirely normal, if a bit gloomy. I spent the afternoon photographing the landscape and taking water samples, despite Lars's warning, for later analysis. I didn't see any signs of bioluminescence or anything unusual. As dusk approached, around 11 p.m. at that latitude in June, I prepared my equipment for night photography, hoping to capture the luminescence I had read about. The sun never completely sets here in summer, but it dips low enough to create a continuous twilight that lasts for several hours. The dim light was perfect for observing bioluminescent organisms. Initially, nothing happened. Then, as true darkness began to envelop the forest, I saw it, a small, glowing red spot beneath the water like a reflected star. Then another spot appeared, and another. Within minutes, the lake's surface began to shimmer with hundreds, perhaps thousands, of ruby-red spots of light. I had never seen any bioluminescent organism produce such a deep red color. Most bioluminescent creatures in nature emit green or blue light. These spots of light looked like drops of blood under the glowing moon, emitting light from within. They moved beneath the water in a pattern that seemed deliberate, not like the random drift of plankton. I started filming video and taking long exposure photos, utterly mesmerized by the sight. As the night grew deeper, the phenomenon intensified. Now the entire lake seemed to be glowing from within with a radiant red light, producing enough illumination for me to see clearly around me without a flashlight. Then I started to hear sounds of faint, rhythmic chirping, almost like cicadas, but deeper and slower. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at all, as if the air itself was vibrating. Accompanying it was another sound, a steady clicking, as if someone was gently tapping on an icy surface, even though it was midsummer and the lake was not frozen. I continued to film, recording both sound and image, when I noticed something strange. the red spots of light began to move in more complex patterns, almost as if they were dancing or arranging themselves into some shape. I stood on a small rock protruding from the lake's edge for a better vantage point and realized that the spots of light had formed the shape of human feet, two glowing red footprints, as if someone had stepped onto the lake's surface with bloody feet. Then another footprint appeared, and another, forming a path that seemed to lead directly towards me. I stood there, frozen, unable to move from awe and horror. The footprints of light continued to advance towards me. Each new footprint appeared a few seconds after the previous one. They came closer and closer to the lake shore, and I realized they were not normal human footprints. They were too large, with unusually long toes, and a shape that wasn't entirely human. When the first footprint reached the lake shore, just a few meters from the rock where I stood, I felt an icy gust of wind blow through, carrying a strong metallic smell. The water began to gently churn at the location of the footprint, as if something was rising from the bottom of the lake. That's when I ran. I grabbed my camera, abandoning my tripod, and dashed into the forest in the direction of my tent. But in my panic, I tripped, hitting my head on a tree root. What happened next, I don't clearly remember. I woke up as the sun was high, lying on the lake shore, thick fog surrounding me. My head ached, and my clothes were soaked, although I don't remember falling into the water. My camera lay beside me, still working, but when I checked the photos and videos from the night before, I discovered something strange. All of them were corrupted. The photos only showed a uniform red color, and the video was just static with the strange background sound, the cicada, chirping and clicking that I had heard. I quickly packed my things and left the lake, not daring to stay another minute. When Lars picked me up at the rendezvous point, he wasn't surprised to see me early, nor did he ask anything about my experience. He just nodded as if he already knew, and we drove back to the village in silence. Before I left Orgrund, the old man who had warned me found me again. He asked if I had seen the footprints, and when I nodded, he sighed heavily. He told me in Swedish mixed with English, "They have marked you. Now they will find you in your dreams. Never sleep near water again." I've been back in the US for 2 weeks, and I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see those red lights moving under my eyelids, and I hear that cicada chirping and clicking. I've attached the remaining photos I managed to salvage. Most are corrupted or overexposed, but there are a few where you can clearly see the red lights under the water, although they don't capture the true beauty and horror of the phenomenon. I don't know what Blodstone holds, or why the bioluminescent creatures in the lake formed the shape of footprints and moved towards me. I don't know why I woke up soaked or what happened during the time I was unconscious. But I know that I will never go back there again, and as the old man warned, I will never sleep near water again. Not lakes, not rivers, not even the ocean. Because sometimes, on truly dark nights, I have the feeling that something has followed me home from Blodstone. Something waiting beneath the water, patient and ancient, with red eyes like bloody stars. Olivia Bergman. I looked at the photos Olivia sent. As she described, most were corrupted, a strange red color filling the entire frame as if a colored filter had been placed over the lens. But there were a few where you could clearly see the lake in the dim twilight and the small ruby-red spots of light beneath the water. In one particular photo, if you adjusted the contrast, you could see something that looked like footprints made of the glowing spots. A shape not entirely human, with unusually long toes and a strange outline. After receiving Olivia's email, I researched Blodstone and the legends surrounding it. It turns out that in Swedish folklore, there are ancient stories about Esjora, or lake beings, human-like creatures living underwater, sometimes luring lost travelers into the water with strange lights and sounds. Interestingly, I found a scientific report from 1987 about an extremely rare type of bioluminescent bacteria discovered in an unnamed lake in northern Sweden. These bacteria produced a type of photoprotein that emitted red light instead of the typical green light of most bioluminescent organisms. But perhaps scientific explanations are not always complete. In many cultures, red symbolizes blood, life, and the boundary between our world and the other side. Water, especially deep and ancient lakes, is often considered a portal to other dimensions, where beings not of our world can cross over. Perhaps the red bioluminescent bacteria in Blodstone are not just simple organisms. Perhaps they are eyes, as the old man warned. the eyes of an ancient entity sleeping beneath the lake bed, waking whenever the sun sets and searching for something. So if you ever travel to remote lakes in northern Europe and happen to see glowing red spots beneath the still water, remember that not all light guides us. Sometimes light is how other things find us. And as the old man warned Olivia, never sleep near water again after you have been marked by the blood stars. This is Morgan Hayes, and you're listening to Late Night Stories Radio. Stay with us. When we return, I'll tell you about Grandma's empty cart and the man who witnessed something unexplainable in a night market in Bulgaria. Welcome back to Late Night Stories Radio. I'm Morgan Hayes, your companion through stories from the Twilight Zone. Tonight is an unusually quiet night. No wind, no rain, even the night animals keep silent, as if holding their breath, listening. In moments of such stillness, we can sometimes hear sounds that are usually drowned out by daily noise. Soft footsteps, distant whispers, or the creaking of wheels from roads that no longer exist. Today, I received a short voicemail from Liam Carter, an American who owns a small cafe in Sofia, Bulgaria. He sent a trembling recording of a strange experience in a deserted night market. Listen to his story. Hello, Morgan. I'm not sure if I should send this message. I've deleted and re-recorded it 3 times already. But I need to tell someone, and after listening to your podcast, I think you might be the only one who won't think I've lost my mind. I'm Liam Carter, an American living in Sofia, Bulgaria, for the past 5 years. I own a small cafe near the Central Market, a large Art Nouveau building from the early 20th century, home to hundreds of stalls selling everything from fresh food to handicrafts. My cafe opens early to serve the vendors and the market's first customers, so I usually get there around 4:00 a.m. to prepare. I'm used to the city at those early hours. The streets are empty and quiet, with only a few people on their way to work. 3 weeks ago, I arrived at the cafe as usual. As I passed through the back area of the market, where vendors usually unload goods, I noticed something strange. The entire area is usually bustling with delivery trucks at this hour, but today it was eerily quiet. There was only a single light source, an old flickering street lamp casting a pale yellow glow onto a section of the unloading area. As I walked past, I heard a familiar sound, the creaking wheels of an old pushcart. It was the kind of cart that older vendors still use to transport their goods in, old wooden cart with worn metal wheels. I looked around and saw a cart moving slowly along the far edge of the unloading area. The strange thing was, no one was pushing it. The cart seemed to move by itself, its wheels turning steadily, emitting that familiar creaking sound. At first, I thought perhaps it was rolling down a slight incline, but the unloading area was perfectly flat, and the cart even turned a small corner as if guided by someone. I walked closer, more curious than afraid. As I got nearer, I smelled a strange scent, a mix of damp flour, old frying oil, and something sweet but not pleasant, almost like faded flowers. The cart was empty, no goods, no boxes, nothing at all, just an old wooden cart with iron wheels moving silently, except for the steady creaking of the wheels. I stood there watching it pass. As it moved into the shadows where the street lamp's light didn't reach, I thought I saw something. A faint figure pushing the cart. It looked like an old woman, hunched over, wearing an old-fashioned headscarf and a long coat. But the figure was almost translucent, just a slight ripple in the air, like thin smoke or heat rising from the pavement on a summer day. I blinked, and the figure vanished, leaving only the cart continuing to move into the darkness. Compelled by curiosity, I decided to follow it. I followed the cart around the corner of the building and into an area I didn't remember ever seeing before, even though I'd walked around this market hundreds of times. It was an older part of the market, with wooden stalls instead of metal, and old signs written in a font I didn't recognize. The air here was heavier, thicker, and that smell flour, oil, and faded flowers was much stronger. The cart stopped in front of a dark stall, and I heard a sound. A faint whispering, as if someone was speaking very softly in a language I didn't understand. It wasn't Bulgarian, nor any language I'd ever heard. It was older, with sharp syllables and deep resonant tones. Then I saw a pair of eyes in the darkness of the stall, 2 glowing red points like embers staring directly at me. They weren't human eyes, nor animal eyes. They were too round, too red, and they held an understanding and intelligence I couldn't explain. I stood there, frozen, unable to move, unable to speak, even unable to breathe. The red eyes continued to watch me, and the whispering grew louder, more urgent. Then the cart started to move again, this time directly towards me, picking up speed. The creaking of the wheels now sounded like a grotesque chuckle. The magic was broken. I turned and ran, not even bothering to look back. I ran through the unloading area, out onto the street, and kept running until I couldn't run anymore. When I stopped to catch my breath, I realized I had left my safety shoes behind. I don't even remember when I took them off. As dawn broke and the city began to wake up, I went back to the market. Everything looked completely normal. Vendors were unloading goods, stall owners were setting up, and the first customers were starting to arrive. The unloading area was crowded and brightly lit, no sign of the old cart or the mysterious stall. I asked some long-time vendors about the area I had seen, but they all shook their heads. One elderly man, who had sold produce here for over 50 years, finally told me something interesting. He said that the old part of the market was destroyed in a fire in the 1940s and rebuilt. He vaguely remembered an old woman who used to sell bread and pastries in the old section, who died in the fire trying to save her goods. Grandma Ivanka, he said. She was always the first one there, even before sunrise, always with her old cart and her pastries. Sweet, very sweet, but there was something strange about them. Eat too many and you'd have strange dreams. I don't know what I saw that night. Perhaps it was just my imagination, fueled by insane working hours and too much strong coffee. Perhaps I dozed off for a moment and dreamt the whole thing. But this morning, when I opened my cafe door, I found something on the doorstep. A small pastry, a traditional Bulgarian bread called kazanak. It was still warm as if fresh from the oven, and it had that familiar sweet scent, flour, frying oil, and faded flowers. I didn't touch it. I didn't eat it. I locked the cafe door and went straight home, where I'm recording this message. I don't know if I should continue working at the cafe. I don't know if Grandma Ivanka, if that's truly her, wants anything from me. But I know that I will never walk past the unloading area in those early morning hours again. And if I hear the creaking of wheels, I'll walk in the opposite direction. That was Liam Carter's story. After receiving his voicemail, I researched the Central Market in Sofia and its history. Indeed, there was a major fire there in 1944 during World War II, which destroyed a significant portion of the building and was subsequently rebuilt. I also found some interesting information about Bulgarian folklore and beliefs about Kachaz asterisk, the spirits of the deceased who cannot rest because they have unfinished business. In some legends, these Kachaz often appear at dusk or dawn, carrying out the tasks they performed in life, usually invisible to most people, except for those born with the second sight. There's another aspect of Liam's story that caught my attention: the red eyes in the dark. In many Balkan cultures, there's a belief that those who practice dark magic, known as *vesteritzes*, witches, can be recognized by their glowing red eyes, especially at night. These vesteritzes are said to be capable of creating enchanted foods that can affect the minds and souls of those who eat them, causing hallucinations, nightmares, or even enchantment. So what happened to Liam that night? Perhaps he inadvertently stepped into a moment where past and present intersected. A fold in time where the old part of the market, long gone in the physical world, continued to exist in another reality. Or perhaps Grandma Ivanka, whoever or whatever she is, continues her work, even though her market ceased to exist nearly a century ago. What worries me most is the pastry Liam found at his cafe door. If the legends about *vesteritzes are true, eating food prepared by them can have serious consequences. I hope he was wise not to touch it. So if you ever visit an old market in the early morning hours and hear the creaking of wheels from an unattended cart, think carefully before following it. And if you happen to meet an old woman who offers you a taste of her pastries, politely decline. Because sometimes the sweetest things hide the bitterest secrets. This is Morgan Hayes, and you're listening to Late Night Stories Radio. Stay with us. When we return, I'll tell you about the reverse-spinning iron gate and the woman who discovered something strange in an abandoned park in Madrid. Welcome back to Late Night Stories Radio. I'm Morgan Hayes, your host on a journey to explore the unexplainable. The night has deepened, and a slender crescent moon hangs in the sky, casting pale streaks of light through the trees around my studio. In the dim moonlight, the familiar world can become alien, and ordinary shapes can transform into something else entirely. Tonight, I want to talk about gates, not just physical structures marking the boundary between one space and another, but also symbols of transition, of thresholds between different worlds. In many cultures, a gate is not just a place you pass through, but also a place where you can get trapped between two states, two spaces, or even two different times. Today, I received an email from Sophia Reynolds, an American architect working for an international design firm in Madrid, Spain. She sent me some photos and a story about her strange experience at an abandoned park on the outskirts of the city. Listen to her story. Dear Morgan, I'm a long-time follower of your podcast, and I never thought I'd have a story to share one day. I'm an architect, a practical woman who believes in science and what can be measured and weighed. But after what happened to me last month, I'm no longer sure about anything. I'm working for an international design firm in Madrid, Spain. One of our projects is to survey and create designs for the renovation of an abandoned amusement park from the 1970s on the outskirts of the city. This park, once known as the Park of Diversions, El Sueño, the Dream, was a popular destination for families during the post-Franco era, but closed in the 1990s after a series of accidents and financial problems. My job is to assess the remaining structures, determine what can be retained in the new design, and what needs to be demolished. I plan to visit the site on a Tuesday afternoon when most of my colleagues were attending a meeting that I was exempt from. The park is located in a large area surrounded by a high wall and security fence. I had keys and permits, so I entered alone, carrying my camera, tablet, and measuring tools. From the very beginning, I felt something strange about this place. Although it had been abandoned for over 30 years, some areas looked almost new, with no signs of time or deterioration. Other areas were quite the opposite, heavily damaged as if they had endured centuries of abandonment, not just decades. I spent most of the afternoon surveying the main area, taking photos and notes. As the sun began to set, I decided to check one last area before leaving, a section of the park called El Labyrinto Magico, the Magical Labyrinth, a type of entertainment maze with optical effects and visual illusions. The entrance to the labyrinth was a giant wrought iron gate, about 5 meters high, with intricate decorative motifs, cogwheels, pendulums, and astronomical symbols. According to the original design records I had seen, this gate was once part of a complex mechanism. As visitors passed through, the gears would spin, creating an optical effect that made those passing through feel as if they were stepping into another space. The gate looked old but surprisingly intact. As I approached, I noticed something interesting. Although there was no electricity in the park, the gears on the gate seemed to be vibrating slightly, as if ready to move. I assumed it might be due to the wind, although it was quite calm that day. I took some photos of the gate and decided to step through it to explore the inside of the labyrinth. The moment I crossed the threshold, I felt a rush of cold air and heard a sound of faint metallic creaking, as if an ancient mechanism was beginning to operate. I turned back and was stunned to see the gears on the gate spinning. Not slowly, as I would expect from a rusty, unpowered mechanism, but quickly and smoothly, as if freshly lubricated and powered. But the strangest thing was that they were spinning in reverse, not clockwise as in the original design I had seen, but counterclockwise. As the gears spun, I noticed a change in my surroundings. The light became strange, not the golden-orange sunset I expected, but an odd blue tint, as if the sun was shining through a colored filter. And the distant city noise had vanished, replaced by a profound silence, broken only by the creaking of the gears and a new sound. A low, resonant metallic hum, almost like a bell, but not quite. I felt dizzy and clung to the gate for balance. As I did, I felt the metal beneath my hands. It was no longer rusty and old, but new and shiny, as if freshly forged. And it was warm, almost hot, though not enough to burn. When I looked through the gate at the direction I had just come from, I no longer saw the rest of the abandoned park. Instead, I saw a bustling, vibrant amusement park, with bright lights, music, and laughter. But it didn't look like any modern amusement park. The clothes, hairstyles, and even the equipment all looked like they were from the 1970s. I turned back towards the labyrinth and saw that it too had changed. No longer an abandoned structure, but a brightly lit, colorful maze with mirrors, lights, and optical effects. But there was something wrong with it. With the way the light moved, with the way the mirrors reflected. Everything seemed slightly distorted, as if viewed through a stretched lens. And in one mirror, I saw my reflection, except it wasn't quite me. The face looked like mine, but the clothes and hairstyle belonged to another era. And the eyes, they weren't my eyes. They were older, more tired, as if they had seen too much. I backed away from the mirror, away from the labyrinth, towards the gate. I needed to get out of here, back to the real world, my world. But when I turned back to the gate, it had changed again. The gears were now spinning faster, and the entire structure seemed to be vibrating. The metallic creaking had become a high-pitched, painful shriek, and the blue light piercing through the gate was now blindingly intense. I hesitated, unsure if I should step through, but I heard a sound from deep within the labyrinth. A non-human sound. A low hiss, almost like laughter, but not quite. And I had a strong feeling that I shouldn't stay here as the sun set completely. I took a deep breath and stepped through the gate. Immediately, I felt as if the entire world was spinning around me. Colors, sounds, and sensations all blended together in a dizzying whirlwind. I closed my eyes and felt like I was falling. When I opened my eyes, I was standing outside the gate in the abandoned park, under the familiar golden-orange sunset. The gears had stopped spinning and now stood still, rusty and old, just as when I first arrived. I stumbled back, trying to understand what had just happened. Had I imagined it all? A trick of light and shadow combined with an overactive imagination and fatigue after a long day. But as I looked down, I noticed something in my hand. A small ticket for El Labirinto Magico, printed on yellowed paper, with the date June 17, 1976. And on my sleeve, a bright red, slightly damp metallic stain, as if freshly forged metal had left its mark. I didn't return to the park after that day. I reported sick and asked to be transferred to another project. The company agreed with surprising ease, as if they were used to such requests. Afterward, I researched the park's history further. It turns out El Labirinto Magico was once its most popular attraction, but also the source of much controversy. There were reports of visitors getting lost in the labyrinth for hours or emerging in a confused state, claiming they had seen unexplainable things. And in 1976, the date on my ticket there was a serious incident when a young girl disappeared in the labyrinth and was never found. Tonight, as I write this email, I look out the window of my apartment in Madrid. It's past midnight and the city should be quiet, but I hear a familiar sound, a faint metallic creaking, as if an old mechanism is starting to operate. And the light outside is no longer the orange of street lamps, but an odd blue tint, as if the sun is shining through a colored filter. I will not look outside. I will not open the window, and I certainly will not step through any gates until the sun rises. Sophia Reynolds. I looked at the photos Sophia sent. Most were typical pictures of an abandoned amusement park, crumbling buildings, rusty rides, and overgrown paths. But one particular photo caught my attention, the iron gate leading to the labyrinth. As Sophia described, it was an impressive structure with gears, pendulums, and astronomical symbols intricately forged into the metal. The strange thing was that while the rest of the park had clearly deteriorated over time, this gate looked almost intact, rusty. Yes, but still complete and seemingly ready to operate. But what truly chilled me was a small detail I'm not sure Sophia noticed when taking the photo. In one corner of the picture, reflected on one of the metal gears, was a faint, blurred face that didn't belong to anyone present in the frame. It looked like the face of a young girl with wide-open eyes, staring straight into the camera. After receiving Sophia's email, I researched Parc de Diversions, El Suno, and its history. It did indeed exist, opening in 1968 and closing in 1994 after a series of financial and safety issues. The Labirinto Magico was once one of its most popular attractions, designed by a German optical artist and physicist named Theodor Müller. I also found a short article from 1976 about the disappearance of a 17-year-old girl named Clara Vega at the park. According to the article, she entered El Labirinto Magico in the late afternoon and was never seen again. A search lasting several days found no trace of her. The case was ultimately recorded as an unsolved missing person incident. Interestingly, in many cultures and spiritual traditions, gates are considered particularly dangerous places not just because they are entrances and exits, but also because they are thresholds, liminal spaces, where the normal rules of reality can be bent or even broken. In European folklore, it was common to place protective symbols on gates and doorways to prevent unwanted entities from passing through. But what happens if a gate not only leads from one space to another, but also from one time to another? What happens if, under certain conditions, perhaps the light of dusk, or the alignment of the stars, or simply the presence of a person attuned to such things, the boundary between now and then becomes as thin as a delicate veil? And what happens if, as you step across that boundary, something from the other side also steps through, into your world, into your life, perhaps even into your mind? I hope Sophia will be okay. I hope the metallic creaking she heard was just the wind blowing through a nearby chimney, and the strange blue light was just a reflection from a neon sign. But I also hope she will do as she said. Not open the window, not step through any gates until the sun rises. Because when the gears spin in reverse, when a gate opens to places and times it shouldn't, no one knows what might pass through in both directions. This is Morgan Hayes, and you're listening to Late Night Stories Radio. Stay with us. When we return, I'll tell you about the Cold Connection car park and the man who heard a mysterious cry for help. Welcome back to Late Night Stories Radio. I'm Morgan Hayes, your companion through the darkness and unexplainable stories. The rain has started to fall again outside my studio. A light but persistent rain, dropping water onto the wooden roof with a steady sound like a heartbeat. There's a strange comfort in that sound, a reminder that the world outside still exists, that we are not alone in the night. But sometimes the feeling of loneliness doesn't come from the absence of others, but from the inability to connect with them. In the modern world, we are surrounded by technology that helps us communicate. Phones, radios, the internet means to bridge distances and share thoughts, feelings, and sometimes desperate cries for help. But what happens when these technologies connect us to something that shouldn't be connected? When the messages we receive don't come from where we think? Today, I received a voicemail from Lucas Pennant, a security guard working at a luxury mall on the Greek island of Zakynthos. He shared with me a strange experience in the mall's underground car park. Listen to his story. Hello, Morgan. I don't know where to start. I've been listening to your show for a while, but never thought I'd be the one sharing a story. These kinds of things don't happen to people like me. I'm a normal 28-year-old guy working security at the Elysium Mall in Zakynthos, a tourist island in Greece. This mall is quite new and luxurious, primarily catering to wealthy tourists. I've been working here for almost 2 years, mostly night shifts, and I've never had any major issues apart from a few petty thefts or drunk customers. 2 months ago, as the tourist season started to slow down, the mall underwent some upgrades, including the installation of a new air conditioning system in the underground car park. It's a 2-story car park located beneath the main building, with about 200 parking spaces. It used to be quite hot and stuffy in the summer, so the new AC system was a welcome addition. Part of my job is to patrol the entire building several times during my shift, including the car park. I usually do this around 11:00 p.m. to 00:00 a.m. and 5:00 a.m. Most of the time, the car park is almost empty during the night shift, with only a few cars belonging to late-working staff. About a week after the new AC system was installed, I was doing my 2:00 a.m. patrol. When I entered car park level B2, the lowest level, I immediately noticed the unusually low temperature. Not just cool, but genuinely cold, cold enough that I could see my breath. I could see frost on some cars and the concrete pillars. I thought the new AC system had probably malfunctioned, so I planned to check the control panel. As I walked through the car park, I heard a strange sound, a faint crackling, as if a radio was getting bad reception. I wasn't carrying a radio, and there were no speakers in the car park. The sound seemed to come from a black BMW parked in the far corner. It was Mr. Papadakis's car, the owner of one of the jewelry stores in the mall. He often left his car overnight when he had to work late. As I got closer to the car, the crackling turned into something clearer, a voice. It was faint and distorted, like it was coming from an old radio, but clear enough for me to hear it speaking English. Help me, someone, help me. At first, I thought the car's radio had accidentally turned on, but as I got closer, I could see that the car was completely off, no lights on, no indication that the electrical system was active. I stood next to the car, listening. The voice continued, "Can't breathe, too cold, someone help me." It was a young woman's voice, trembling and weak, as if she was in shock or injured. I looked inside the car, but it was empty. The voice seemed to be coming from the car's radio, even though it was clearly off. "Hello," I called out, touching the car door. "Is anyone there?" As soon as I touched the car, the voice stopped. But then I heard it from behind me, from the emergency intercom system attached to a pillar. It was one of those red boxes with a button that people can use to call security or emergency services. I turned around and saw the light on the intercom box flashing, which it only does when someone is using it. I went over and heard the same voice, louder and clearer. "Please, I'm stuck in the car. Can't breathe. Too cold." The voice sounded pained and desperate. I pressed the button and said, "This is security. Where are you? Where is your car?" "Level B2, East Corner, blue Fiat. Please hurry." I turned around and looked. There was no blue Fiat in the car park. In fact, there were only 4 cars in the entire B2 level at that time. Mr. Papadakis's BMW, my car, and 2 other cars belonging to late-working staff. No blue Fiat here. I said into the intercom, "Are you sure you're on B2? May 17, 2018. Please, no more air." That sent a chill down my spine. It was October 15, 2023, more than 5 years after the date she mentioned. Before I could say anything else, the intercom turned off, the light no longer flashing. I stood there, trying to comprehend what had just happened, when the temperature suddenly dropped further. Now it was truly freezing, perhaps near freezing point. I could see frost covering the cars and the floor. Then I heard that voice again, but this time it came from the public address speakers on the ceiling. No one heard me. 5 years. Still here. Still cold. The voice was stronger, clearer, but still had a strange metallic distortion, as if speaking through a bad line. And now it had a haunting quality, an emptiness I couldn't describe. "Someone who is speaking?" I asked, my voice echoing in the empty car park. "Elena, I am Elena, my car. The door is jammed. No one found me." I took out my phone and tried to call my colleague in the main security room, but there was no signal. I walked towards the stairwell door, wanting to go upstairs and seek help. But as I got there, I heard a car engine start. I turned around and saw a car that hadn't been there before. An old blue Fiat, parked in the east corner, exactly where the voice had described. Its headlights were on, brightly, but unnaturally so. The light was too blue, too cold. The engine roared, a sound not like a normal car engine, but like an electronic screech. I stood frozen as the car began to move, not towards me, but towards the concrete wall. It sped up, and for a moment I thought it would crash into the wall. But instead, it seemed to pass right through the wall, as if it wasn't really there. As the car disappeared, all the electrical systems in the car park suddenly went out, lights, intercom, everything. I stood in complete darkness for a few seconds before the emergency lights came on, casting a faint red glow. And then I heard a whisper right next to my ear, not through any electronic system, but a real voice right beside me. "Thanks for listening. No one has for the past 5 years." I spun around, but no one was there. The temperature suddenly returned to normal, and all the electrical systems turned back on again as if nothing had happened. I ran up the stairs to the main security room. My colleague Nikos was sitting there watching the security camera monitors. I asked him if he had seen anything strange in the car park. "No, everything's normal," he said. "Why?" I told him I wanted to check the footage. We rewound the video from 20 minutes before I entered the car park. On the screen, I saw myself walking in, but then there was a gap. The video was cut for about 10 minutes. Then I reappeared, running towards the stairwell door. "This is strange," Nikos said. "Probably a technical glitch." The next day, I searched online for information about any accidents that had occurred in the car park, especially involving a woman named Elena and a blue Fiat. I found nothing specific, but I discovered that before the mall was built 7 years ago, this area used to be a smaller outdoor car park serving a nearby hotel. I went to the local library and looked for old newspaper articles, and I found a small news item from May 2018. A young Italian tourist named Alina Rixai had been reported missing during her vacation in Zakynthos. Her rental car, a blue Fiat, had also disappeared. The article said police suspected she might have driven off the island on a ferry, although there were no records of her buying a ticket. The case was never resolved. I don't know what happened in the car park that night. Was Alina Rixai truly stuck in her car, freezing to death in the old hotel car park in 2018, at the very spot that is now our underground B2 car park? Did our new air conditioning system inadvertently create the same freezing conditions that killed her, creating a kind of window or connection to the past? I don't know. But I know that I no longer do the 2:00 a.m. patrols in the car park. I ask Nikos to do it, with the excuse that I'm allergic to the dust down there. And every time I hear a radio crackle or an emergency intercom flash when no one is using it, I walk the other way. Because I think that not all signals we receive come from this world, and not all cries for help can be answered. Lucas Pennant. After receiving Lucas's voicemail, I researched Alina Rixai and her disappearance. I found a few short articles about the incident, confirming that a 27-year-old Italian tourist had gone missing during her vacation in Zakynthos in May 2018. Her rental car, a blue Fiat Panda, was never found. Interestingly, in a follow-up article a few months later, the police mentioned that Alina's mobile phone had emitted its last signal from the area around the Panorama Hotel, located precisely where the Elysium Mall now stands. I also researched the phenomenon known as electronic voice phenomenon, or EVP. This is the phenomenon where paranormal researchers believe entities from the other side can communicate through electronic devices. In many cases, these voices are recorded on radios, tape recorders, or other communication devices, often within static frequencies or the white noise between channels. Some researchers theorize that at certain times and conditions, the membranes separating realities or times can become thinner, allowing signals, or in Lucas's case, a cry for help, to penetrate through. Sudden changes in temperature are often reported in paranormal phenomena, as if the energy needed for communication across time or space is being drawn from the surrounding environment. One particularly disturbing aspect of Lucas's story is the detail about the car seemingly passing through the wall. In many cultures, there is a belief that trapped spirits can sometimes repeat their final moments in an endless loop, especially if their death was particularly painful or sudden. Perhaps what Lucas witnessed was Alina, or her memory, image, or echo, reliving her final moments. So if you ever hear a strange voice on the radio, or see the light of an emergency intercom flashing when no one is using it, stop and listen. It might just be static, a technical glitch, but it might also be, just might be, someone trying to communicate, someone trapped between frequencies, between worlds, or between times, desperately seeking a connection, a voice, a hand to pull them out of the cold darkness. This is Morgan Hayes, and you're listening to Late Night Stories Radio. Stay with us. When we return, I'll tell you about the death elevator and the girl who faced her deepest fears in an office building in Frankfurt. Welcome back to Late Night Stories Radio. I'm Morgan Hayes, your companion through stories from the Twilight Zone. Tonight is the last night of our special series on real urban legends. Outside my studio, a full moon hangs in the sky, casting its silver light down on Whispering Pines Forest. In the moonlight, everything takes on an eerie beauty, as if belonging to another world. A world where darkness and light coexist in perfect balance, where the unexplainable becomes possible. Tonight, I want to end our series with a story about one of humanity's most common fears, the fear of being trapped, confined in a small, enclosed space. And what could be more terrifying than being stuck in an elevator? A metal box suspended high above the ground, with only a thin cable separating you from the abyss below. Today, I received an email from Grace Wilson, an intern at a financial company in Frankfurt, Germany. She shared with me a horrifying experience in the office building's elevator, an experience that forever changed the way she perceived enclosed spaces. Listen to her story. Dear Morgan, I hope this email reaches you. I've been listening to your podcast for a while, usually on sleepless nights. And I've had many such nights since that incident. I'm a 22-year-old intern at Bergman Financial, a financial consulting firm in Frankfurt, Germany. I've been working here for 3 months, and everything was going quite smoothly until that day I encountered what the office workers call the asterisk Todsifzug asterisk, the death elevator. Our company occupies the top 5 floors of a 20-story building in the financial district. It's a mixed-use building with offices, apartments, and a few restaurants on the ground floor. It was built in the 1970s and has been renovated several times, but it still retains some old features, including the elevator system. There are 4 elevators serving the building, numbered 1 to 4. The first 3 are modern, high-speed elevators renovated in the most recent upgrade. But elevator number 4, the one furthest to the right, is still the original system from the 70s. It's slower, noisier, and tends to shake more than the other elevators. Most people in the building avoid using elevator number 4 if possible. But sometimes, when the other 3 elevators are busy, you have no choice. The older office workers call it the Todsifzug asterisk, the death elevator, a nickname supposedly stemming from how frequently it used to get stuck, making people feel like they were in a vertical coffin. I had heard rumors about elevator number 4, how it sometimes stopped on floors no one had pressed, or how its lights flickered erratically. But I thought they were just typical office stories, exaggerated over time for entertainment during long workdays. That day, I was working late to finish a project. When I finally wrapped up, it was almost 9:00 p.m. and the building was almost empty. I packed my things, shut down my computer, and went to the elevator area. I pressed the call button and waited. The first 3 elevators all showed they were on lower floors in the building, but elevator number 4 showed it was on the 20th floor, my floor. I didn't remember seeing anyone use it before, but I didn't think much of it. When the door of elevator number 4 opened, I hesitated a bit. The lights inside flickered faintly, and the atmosphere inside felt different. Not physically, it still had the same metal walls and old handrails, but there was a strange feeling about it. The air inside seemed thicker, colder. But I was tired and just wanted to go home, so I stepped in and pressed the ground floor button. The door closed with a heavy clang, and the elevator began to descend. Initially, everything was normal, although the elevator moved slower than I remembered. But when it reached around the 15th floor, I noticed something strange. The floor display no longer showed numbers. Instead, it just flickered with a strange symbol shape I didn't recognize, almost like a downward-pointing arrow but distorted. The elevator continued to descend, but now faster and with a new noise. A high-pitched metallic shriek, as if the brakes were trying to grip but failing. I started to feel anxious and pressed the ground floor button repeatedly, as if that would help. As the elevator continued to accelerate, I felt a falling sensation in my stomach, like when you're on a roller coaster, but it didn't stop. The falling sensation continued, stronger, longer than I thought possible. I gripped the handrail tightly, certain the cable had snapped and we were in freefall. I pressed the alarm button, but no sound came out. I took out my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. The screen just showed no service with a strange symbol where the signal bars usually were the same distorted symbol as on the elevator display. The lights started to flicker faster, and in the dark moments between flashes, I thought I saw something. A figure in the corner of the elevator, a shadow darker than the surrounding darkness. I closed my eyes and clung to the handrail as the elevator continued to fall, faster and faster. I can't say exactly how long that feeling lasted. Maybe only a few seconds, but it felt like minutes. Then suddenly, the elevator stopped. Not a sudden jolt as I feared, but a gradual deceleration until it came to a complete stop. The lights stopped flickering, and in the steady light, I could see that I was alone in the elevator, no shadowy figure in the corner. I looked at the floor display, hoping to see the ground floor. Instead, it showed B5. This made no sense. As far as I knew, the building only had 3 basement levels, B1 to B3, no B5. The elevator doors opened, and I hesitated. Outside wasn't a brightly lit corridor like the other basement levels, but a dark space illuminated only by a few red emergency lights. The air was cold and damp, carrying the smell of damp concrete and rusty metal. I didn't want to go out, but I also didn't want to stay in the elevator if it decided to fall again. I timidly stepped out into the dark corridor. I was standing in a vast space like a garage, but there were no cars. The floor was rough concrete, and the ceiling was low, with exposed ducts and electrical wires. The red emergency lights created faint patches of light amidst the deep shadows. I took out my phone again and turned on its flashlight. In the stronger light, I could see that this space hadn't been used in a very long time. The floor was covered in dust, broken only by a single set of footprints, my footprints. But as I shone the light further into the darkness, I noticed something else. There were markings on the walls, not modern graffiti, but older symbols carved into the concrete. They were similar to what I had seen on the elevator display and my phone, distorted shapes that looked almost like arrows, but not quite. And then I realized they weren't arrows. They were stylized human figures with arms and legs spread wide, and all of them pointed downwards, as if they were falling or being pulled down. I turned back to the elevator, only to find that the doors had closed. I pressed the call button, but nothing happened. No sound, no lights, no indication that the button was working. I started to panic. I shone my flashlight around, searching for an exit, a staircase, an emergency door, anything. I saw a door at the far end of the space and started walking towards it. As I walked through the empty space, I started hearing sounds, distant mechanical noises, metallic creaking, and another sound, softer, almost like whispering. It came from everywhere and nowhere at all, as if the space around me was speaking. I sped up, almost running towards the door. As I got closer, I could see it was an emergency exit with a push bar. I pushed it open and found myself standing before a concrete staircase. Unlike the modern emergency staircases on the upper floors, this one looked older, more rudimentary, as if it belonged to a completely different building. The concrete walls were unpainted, and the steps were worn in the middle, as if they had been used for decades. I started climbing, counting the floors as I went, B4, B3, B2, B1. Then I continued up through the first floor, the second floor, and so on. The staircase seemed to go on forever, and I started to gasp for breath. But I didn't dare stop. I had reached the 12th floor when I heard a sound from below, the opening and closing of a door, and then footsteps. Someone or something was following me. I didn't look back, I just sped up, climbing faster despite my aching legs and ragged breath. The footsteps behind me also sped up, but they didn't sound like normal footsteps. They were too fast, too light, as if someone was running on tiptoes or not touching the floor at all. When I reached the 18th floor, I saw a door with the number 19 on it, only one more floor to my office. I could hear the footsteps getting closer, perhaps only 2 or 3 floors away. I reached for the door to the 19th floor, pulled it open, and dashed into the hallway. The hallway lights were flickering, but it was normal light, not the strange red glow of the B5 level. I ran down the hallway to the elevator area, hoping to find one of the safe elevators. When I got there, I saw all 4 elevators. Doors closed, looking completely normal. I pressed the call button, and immediately elevator number 1's doors opened. I rushed in, pressed the ground floor button, and leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath as the doors closed. The elevator began to descend, smoothly and quietly. The floor display worked normally, counting down, 19, 18, 17. When it reached the 5th floor, the elevator stopped to pick someone up. The doors opened, and a middle-aged man in a security uniform stepped in. He nodded a greeting to me, and I almost cried with relief at seeing a normal person. "Working late, are we?" he asked with a heavy German accent. "Yes," I said, trying to keep my composure. "What is floor B5? The man looked at me, frowning. "There is no B5, only B1, B2, and B3, the car park." "But I was just there," I said. "Elevator number 4 took me down there." The man looked at me for a long time. "Elevator number 4 has been out of order for a week, being repaired." I didn't know what to say. I knew what I had experienced was real. I could still feel the cold, damp air of B5 on my skin. I could still hear the strange footsteps in the stairwell. We reached the ground floor in silence. When the doors opened, I almost ran out, through the lobby, and onto the street. I didn't stop until I reached the subway station, surrounded by other people, under the bright lights. I didn't go to work the next day. I called in sick and spent the entire day searching for information about the building. And I found something interesting. Before it was rebuilt in the 1970s, this site was once the headquarters of a chemical company with deep underground laboratories. A fire in 1967 destroyed most of the building and killed 13 people, mostly scientists working in the underground labs. When I finally returned to work, I asked an old colleague about the Todesif asterisk, the death elevator. He told me that the nickname didn't just come from the elevator frequently getting stuck. It stemmed from an incident in the 1980s when that elevator suddenly free fell from the top floor all the way to the bottom of the shaft, killing all 5 people inside. Engineers never found the exact reason why the malfunction occurred. All safety measures seem to have failed at once, which is almost statistically impossible. The building repaired the elevator and continued to use it. But since then, it has been the source of many strange stories. About it going to non-existent floors, about whispered voices from the intercom system, and about the feeling that you are not quite alone inside the elevator car. I still work in that building, but I never use elevator number 4 anymore. Even if it's the only elevator available, even if I have to wait 20 minutes for another elevator, even if I have to walk 20 floors. And I never stay in the office after 6:00 p.m. anymore. Because now I know that beneath the ground we walk on every day, beneath the basements and underground pipes, there are deeper, darker places. Places that some elevators can reach if they fall far enough. And in those places, there are things waiting, listening to the noises from the world above, sometimes reaching up to pull us down. Grace Wilson. After receiving Grace's email, I researched the history of buildings in Frankfurt, especially in the financial district. I found several records of a large fire in 1967 at the location Grace described, involving a chemical company called Chemisch Fortun AG. According to reports, the fire started in an underground laboratory and quickly spread, destroying most of the building and killing 13 people. I also found a small article from 1984 about a severe elevator accident at an office building in Frankfurt that killed 5 people. The article mentioned that safety engineers could not explain why all the elevator's safety systems failed simultaneously. Interestingly, in many cultures, elevators and elevator shafts are not just physical structures, but also powerful symbols of transition between worlds. In Norse mythology, Yggdrasil, the world tree, has roots extending down to Helheim, the realm of the dead. In Greek mythology, the entrance to Hades is often described as a long path downwards into the earth. And in many modern traditions, elevator shafts are ideal settings for ghost stories. Perhaps because they are vertical tunnels extending deep into the earth, beyond our sight. Perhaps elevator number 4 that Grace took was not merely a malfunctioning machine. Perhaps under certain conditions when the building is almost empty, when the night is deep, when the boundary between our world and other worlds becomes thin, it transforms into something else. A gateway, a passage down to places that shouldn't exist. So the next time you find yourself alone in an old elevator and feel it shake and creak as it descends, ask yourself if it's truly taking you to the floor you selected, or if it's taking you to a deeper, darker place, a place between floors, between realities, where the lost still wander in the dark and things that never lived still wait, listening to the noises from the world above and occasionally pressing the call button. This is Morgan Hayes, and you have been listening to Late Night Stories Radio. Our special series on real urban legends comes to an end here. I hope these stories have helped you see the world around you in a new way. Not just what you can see and touch, but also what might exist in the corner of your eye, in the shadows, and in those moments when the world falls silent and listens. Join us next Saturday when we will explore a new topic, the call from the deep sea. Until then, keep your lights on, your doors locked, and always remember that sometimes the strangest stories are the true ones. Good night and sweet dreams if you can.